Send Shoes and Luke too, Michael said. 3 heads are better than 1. They can help Hale and branch off if there are separate leads. Thanks. He's your onus now, Michael reminded. That means he's one of us. He laughed darkly before he could help it, rapping his knuckles against the table afterward. That's exactly what I didn't want to happen. Too late now. Yeah, he blew out a breath. I won't force you, but think about what we said. Why so interested in what I do with Ineski anyway? It was out of character for Michael, who typically was too busy with the Brummel and the family business to bother with any of their personal lives unless they asked him themselves. Rabbit likes you, Michael stated. He says the 2 of you are similar. To be honest, I don't see it, but he's rarely wrong about things like that. Similar how? Apparently, you've been apprehensive for a really long time and hiding it from the rest of us. It's given you a lot of guilt. Flix tried not to give away how nervous he was now either. Did he tell you why? No. Michael held his gaze. He insists you will eventually, when you're ready. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with whatever Rabbit is okay with. I trust him with my life. Don't you trust your onus? Did Flix trust Ani? What a weighted question. One he didn't quite have an answer to. Chapter 19. Ani was still pouting when Flix got back, sitting on the center of the bed, back against the headboard, arms wrapped around his upturned knees. He watched Flix with his face partially concealed, eyes tracking him across the room as he entered and removed his multi-slate. The whole drive here, Flix had been caught up in his thoughts, operating on autopilot, yet now that he was finally with Ineski again, it felt like his mind had emptied. He settled against the dresser and crossed his arms, staring back at Ani. It hadn't been long, but he somehow seemed smaller. Hey, he said. Am I killing your soul? Ineski frowned. Never mind. Most of the anger he'd felt toward the younger man had dissipated, but the fear that he would do something rash again was still there. Michael had made it sound like this relationship wouldn't work if Flix didn't somehow develop trust in Ani, but... relationship. What the hell? You're my onus, but we aren't dating. We fuck, but that isn't love. He tipped his head. What are we, Ani? He sighed, sadly. Broken. Broken, huh? Flix licked his lips and forced himself to ask. Any chance we can be fixed, do you think? A lifetime of this seemed exhausting. That's not what he wanted. He'd never really thought about it. Up until now, Flix had been content pining for Ineski from afar. When it got too much, he'd find a warm body to screw. An onus had never even occurred to him, considering he couldn't imagine choosing someone to share forever with without telling them about his powers. Letting anyone in on that particular secret would have been too dangerous. Except there was a very good chance that Rabbit already knew all about it. Flix couldn't figure out how, was pretty sure he'd been as careful as ever, especially around Michael's boyfriend. There was nothing else worth mentioning that he was keeping, however, which meant the big secret Rabbit had alluded to had to be this. Flix was going to have to tell Michael, and in the off chance things didn't go as swimmingly as Rabbit clearly believed they would, having Ani able to run away on his own 2 feet at any given notice would be ideal. Flix, Ineski eyed him suspiciously. Don't mess with me right now, please. He slowly made his way over to the side of the bed where the chain was secured to the wall. Just the room. We'll start small until you prove you can be trusted. Flix could manage that much, could control his anxiety to that extent. His fingers went to the collar, and he pressed his thumb against the hidden sensor, holding Ani's gaze all the while. When it clicked and fell away, he caught it, placing it pointedly on the end table before straightening. Ineski tentatively rubbed at his throat, eyes wide. Really? You aren't just... Go shower, he instructed, motioning with his chin toward the bathroom door across the room. Only Ani hesitated. What's wrong? He wasn't already going to argue that it wasn't enough, was he? If he did, Flix didn't think he could contain his anger. He should have leached before coming in here to be safe, had been too caught up in his head to think about it. You just got here, Aneski said, his voice quivering slightly. Yeah? Oh. The last time Flix had told him to shower, he walked out on him during. Dropping down onto the bed at his side, Flix ran a hand through Ani's hair and pulled him in for a light kiss before shoving him playfully away. Relax, baby. I'm just sending you in first. I'll join you in a minute. You're my onus now, remember? It's not like before. That's not as big of a comfort as you make it seem, Ani surprised him by saying. I might have the title, but that doesn't mean anything. You won't show me around or even tell all of your friends about us. I'm a secret, and secrets can remain locked up in big houses alone. He frowned. You think I'm going to unchain you from the wall but keep you trapped in this house on your own? I'm sure you'll provide 1 or 2 staff members to clean and cook, Ani said, but otherwise, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Yes, he disagreed. It is. I can't fuck you if I'm not with you now, can I? He couldn't smell him or talk to him or listen to the sound of his breathing either, but Flix kept those things to himself. It's not another trap, Tiny Terror, he reassured again. Then, why the change of heart? Actually, this was a good chance to ask. Why didn't you tell me you're friends with Rabbit? Trace? He shook his head. We're not that close. We just run in the same social circles sometimes. Why? He vouched for you. Ani cocked his head. You sound jealous. Do I need to be? Of Rabbit? He snorted and laughed. Come on. Of anyone, Flix corrected. I'm your onus, Ani pointed out, and you've got me locked away. If anything, I should be the one worried about becoming jealous. Who knows what you're doing, or who you're talking to out there? Flix rolled his eyes and stood. Shower. Now. When Ani still didn't seem entirely convinced, Flix started undoing the buttons of his shirt. That seemed to reassure him at least enough to get him to climb off the bed and head toward the bathroom, though he paused again just beneath the entrance. You can keep the door open, Flix offered. From where the door was situated, Ani couldn't see into this side of the room, but he'd be able to keep his eye on the exit that led into the hallway. Flix wouldn't be able to walk out without him catching him first. Why are you being nice all of a sudden? Aneski asked. I guess we're both going to have to work on gaining the other's trust again, huh? He hadn't realized it gotten that bad. No, that was a lie. Of course he had. That'd been what he'd wanted from the beginning, what he'd set out to achieve. The original goal was to push you so far away that you'd be too pissed to bother with me ever again, but clearly that failed miserably. If we were going to have to be with each other anyway, there's no need for either of us to hate the experience. It's going to be a lasting one after all. That's it? What do you want me to say, Ani? I want you to tell me what I really have to do to get out of here, he said, then backtracked and added, I'll come back. I didn't mean that how it sounded. I want to be able to come and go freely. What do I have to do to get you to let me? Getting ahead of yourself, don't you think? Flix drawled. You're always like this. I give an inch and you instantly think you deserve a mile. You used to give me everything I needed, even without me having to ask for it, Aneski replied. I spoiled you, he agreed. So spoil me again. As if turning back the clock was that simple. Ani? All right. He held up a hand and stepped into the bathroom. I'm going. Flix listened to the sound of the shower being turned on and rubbed at the ache in the back of his neck. Was it meant to be this difficult? Logically, he could see the reason in everything he'd been told, and yet, did he actually believe Ani would hurt himself again? The problem was he hadn't seen it coming the first time, so could he really trust his own judgment on this? Perhaps almost dying had knocked some sense into the younger guy, but perhaps not. There really was no way to be certain. And therein lay the issue. There was no way to be certain. Did Flix simply take his word for it so they could move forward, or did he cling to this fear? Why are you even afraid, dipshit? He quietly scolded himself. It was true he'd always wanted Ani for himself, but it was also true he'd never believed that was a real possibility. Now that things had come to this, he was struggling with accepting it and adjusting to their new roles. Flix was no longer the guy who had to keep his distance to protect him. Since Ani was his owness, staying as close as possible was the best way to keep him safe now. He'd been trying to buy himself some time to figure out how many people he wanted to know about this, knowing the second he announced it, it'd be the same as painting a target on Ineski's back. But hiding him away like some big secret wouldn't work in the long term. He knew that. Eventually, Ani really would start to resent him, and then he might do something stupid again purely out of spite. If Flix's goal was to keep him safe, Rabbit was right. He needed to give him a reason to want to stick around, to not want to put his own life in danger again. And the best way he could do that was to make sure he tied Ani so tightly to him he wouldn't be able to escape, even if he tried. Flix returned to the dresser and picked up Ineski's multi-slate, turning the device on. He'd shut it down when he'd taken it off of Ani, but now seemed like the right time to offer it back to him and let him contact his friends. They were probably... A flood of missed messages came in, dinging one after the other with little pause. There were too many to count, which Flix had been expecting, many of them from Gannon and Rexton. Even when he'd only come around as Russ's friend, Flix had noticed the way Gannon had felt toward Ineski. It'd become clear as time passed that neither Ani or Rexton had picked up on it themselves, which was strange considering how obvious it was. He didn't plan on reading the messages, seeing no need to invade Ineski's privacy to that extent. But then another name he was familiar with popped up, and he stiffened. Flix opened the device and went straight to the message, something dark and demanding twisting inside of him. Hughes. Hey, sorry again for the other night. Did you end up finding a replacement? If not, I'm all good to film this weekend if you still need me. Let me know. Why was a member of the Brummel texting Ani? And why was he talking about filming? As far as Flix knew, there was only one thing Ani filmed in his free time. He thought back on the past Bind films he'd watched. At the time, he'd been so focused on Ineski on screen, he hadn't really paid much attention to his acting partner. But now, it'd been Hughes. The blonde hair, the broad shoulders, that overly cocky half grin he gave whenever he was pleased with himself. A bitter laugh escaped Flix before he could help it, his hand tightening on the device. All of that effort to keep Ineski away from the Brummel, only to learn he'd been screwing one of them behind Flix's back anyway. Hughes was younger than the both of them. Was that the sort of thing Ani was actually into? Did he get off on younger guys? Was Flix merely a replacement, as Hughes had put it in his message? Before he fully understood what he intended, Flix switched to his own device and shot off a couple of messages. Then he went back to Ani's and sent one from there. He'd only just replaced them both on the dresser surface when the Tiny Terror, his Tiny Terror, poked his head from the bathroom. Ani had a towel wrapped low around his waist and was clutching it against his hip to keep it closed. He looked at Flix with an odd expression, a mixture of doubt and eagerness, seemingly working himself up to finally asking, "Are you coming? You said you were coming." "Change of plans," Flix announced. "Let's go out." Ineski blinked at him. "What? Why?" he inquired. "You don't want to?" "No, it's not that," he quickly said. "I do." "That eager to get out of this house, Ani?" He tipped his head. "Or is it you can't wait to try and get away from me?" Ineski huffed and stepped further into the bedroom. "How many times do you need me to prove that I want to be with you, Flix?" "You asked what you have to do to get me to loosen the reins fully," Flix said. "Are you willing to do whatever I ask?" "Yes." There was no hesitation in his reply. "Put your clothes back on and meet me downstairs." "Where are we going?" "You'll see." Later on, everyone in this damn city who needed to would. Chapter 20. Concealed wasn't really a place that Flix frequented, and it certainly wasn't a place he'd ever performed at, but he drove them there without hesitation, mind made up. The Voyeur and Exhibitionist Club also acted as a high-end restaurant and was owned by one of the prince's people, Pavel Hart. Some of the Brummel raved about the place, and the in-person entertainment along with the upper-class clientele meant for stricter security measures. There were different levels to the building, as well as various rooms broken up by categories such as themes and comfort zone. "Can I take this off now?" Ani asked from the passenger seat, picking at the thick white blindfold Flix had made him put on before getting into the car. No. He wasn't sure if Aneski had ever visited Concealed, but it wouldn't be a stretch to believe he at least knew of it. Considering Ani was a part of the sex scene, what with his business with the seaside. "Keep it on." "At least tell me where we're going," he sighed. "We're already here." Flix pulled into the underground lot and parked in one of the VIP spaces. "Ground rules, Tiny Terror." "But this is it, right?" he asked. "I do everything you tell me to tonight, and you promise you won't put me back there?" "In my bed?" he snorted. "Oh, you're for sure going back there." "Flix." "All right. Jokes aside, yeah, that's the deal. No more chains so long as you're good for me." "I mean," Ani turned his face away, mumbling, "I didn't say I don't like chains." Flix chuckled. "You're in luck then, because where I'm taking you, there will be plenty of things to tie you up with." Aneski perked up, but it was hard to tell with the blindfold on whether it was out of curiosity or concern. "Where are we?" "Ground rules," Flix repeated, purposefully ignoring the question. "You speak to no one else but me, even if they try to get your attention, no matter who it is. Understood? If you break this rule, I'll take it as a sign I can't trust you after all." He was clearly suspicious, but ended up nodding his head curtly. "Next, you do exactly as I say, no questions asked." "I won't kill anyone I can't see," Ani stated. Flix snorted. "Relax, baby, we aren't here for murder." "What are we?" "I said no questions." Ani grew silent and then said, "You're going to fuck me, aren't you?" Flix let his silence speak for itself. "In front of people?" Aneski held himself perfectly still, waiting. He hadn't wanted to tell him in case Ani would oppose, but now that it was out, he tried to come up with the best way to explain without alluding to the fact he'd seen those texts from Hughes and Gannon. "I'm not against it." Ani took pity on him and said first, "I fuck people on film for a living, remember? Although, I guess that's different than doing it to an audience." "Are we at Concealed?" He turned to face Flix's direction better. "Please tell me it's at least going to be in a controlled setting, and you're not going to, screw me in front of your friends or something." Flix scrunched his nose. "What are you imagining right now, Tiny Terror? I mean, this could be the Void Manor, and you think Michael would be okay with me tossing you onto his pristine foyer floor and letting you cream the place?" He licked his lips. "I don't suppose so." "No," he chuckled, some of the tension and the anger that had been swirling through him like a twister easing at the ridiculousness of this conversation. "We're at Concealed," he confirmed, leaning in reach for the blindfold. The second his fingers touched the back of the fabric, however, Ani pulled away. "Don't," he said, causing Flix to frown. "It's unnecessary since you figured out where we are." "I'm all right with doing it," Ani began. "Really, I meant it. I'll do whatever you want, but I don't think I can see them watching. Usually when I film, I have a mask on. It's not the same, but I think I'll need it." "Is that okay?" "I was going to drag you in there and make you do this whether you wanted to or not," Flix admitted. "Is that okay?" Ani surprised him by chuckling. "Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I'm asking this seriously. Is there something wrong with you mentally that I don't know about?" He just told him he was going to screw him senseless in front of a crowd, even if he had to do it against his will, and yet Ani was grinning like the cat that caught the canary. "You want people to see us together," Aneski said. Ah, so he was getting all excited because he figured afterward there was no way Flix was going to lock him back up and throw away the key. Fair. Disappointing that that's where his mind initially went, but Flix couldn't fault him for it. Turning the hovercar off, he popped open his door. "Hold on and let me come around for you," he instructed, stepping out and quickly circling, certain that Ani wouldn't listen. Aneski had one foot on the pavement by the time Flix reached there, cheeky grin still in place even as Flix chided him with a click of his tongue and helped him the rest of the way out. "It hasn't even been 5 minutes and you're already not listening to me," he pointed out, taking Ani's hand to lead him to the entrance across the lot. The place was packed, but there weren't many other people in the garage, which made it easier for them to reach the guarded glass door. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Fomini." The guard stopped him from dropping Ani's hand to access his multi-slate and the membership card stored there. "We've been expecting you. The room you've asked for is prepared and ready whenever you are. If you would like, you have full use of the VIP elevator, which will take you straight up to your desired floor, though I've been instructed to offer you use of level 5 if your plans have changed." "They haven't," Flix said, stepping through as soon as the guard unlocked the entrance. "But tell Pavel I said thanks." "What's on level 5? Ani leaned in and whispered as they walked through the foyer and straight to the golden elevator set in the middle row of 4 others. He kept close to Flix, tucking himself against him once they were in the medium-sized box like he actually trusted him. "What happened to being angry?" Flix suddenly asked. "One minute you're so pissed off about Russ, you're kidnapping me, and the next you're clinging to me like this?" He shook his arm, but Aneski didn't loosen his grip. "Don't tell me all it took was locking you up for a few days to get these types of results." "I thought you had something to do with my brother's death," he reminded. "Now that I know the truth, the only thing I have to be mad about is the way you've treated me since then. Forgetting you took a guy's virginity is fucked up, by the way. But it's still kind of nice knowing you didn't think I was bad in bed." "There are many things," Flix stated, "but that is definitely not one of them." The elevator had mirrored walls, and he took a moment to gaze at their reflections. He was dressed in his Veil uniform, and he'd given Ani a similar set just without the pin. With the way the younger man was holding on to him, even with the blindfold as an excuse, it was impossible to miss they were lovers. "Where'd you keep getting the uniforms from, Ani?" He's been meaning to ask, and there was no time like the present. "Huh?" He tipped his head in his direction, but the blindfold prevented him from making eye contact. "You mean the Veil ones? You can't be on campus without one, so anytime I needed to, I borrowed one from a friend." "Why?" "What friend?" Flix already had half a mind to break every single one of Yuze's limbs, but if it was him, he'd add his fingers in for good measure. No, actually, that was where he should start, considering those hands had been all over what was his. "Bridger, sometimes," Aneski replied, completely unaware of the violent turn Flix's thoughts had taken. "Sila once or twice." "Sila?" He stopped him. "Sila Varun?" "Yeah, I did him a couple of favors before." "How many fucking people are you friends with on this damn planet?" The elevator stopped on the top floor and dinged, and Flix shook his head as he stepped out. He should have invited the entire city to this event just to satisfy the monstrous jealousy making quick work of his sanity. Honestly, it was a miracle he'd managed to stay apart from Ani this long, if this was how he was going to react the second they became an item. "That's what I wanted to ask," Aneski said, as Flix led him down the wide hallway. "How'd you manage to get a room here so quickly? What happened when I went into the bathroom? Clearly, something had to have triggered this. One second you were refusing to let me step foot out of the bedroom, and now you've dragged me out of the house. What's up?" "Scared?" Flix stopped them in front of the door with the number they'd been assigned, hanging over the top in polished gold. "You only do rash things when you're angry," Ani said. "So, yeah, kind of. But can you not take your anger out on me? I didn't do anything." He typed in the security code he'd been given on the keypad to the left and snorted. "How can you be so sure?" Ani hesitated. "I was literally tied up." "You're about to be again." The door whooshed open, giving Flix his first look at the pristine room. It was square-shaped, with glass one-way mirror walls making up the 3 sides that didn't attach to the hallway they were still standing in. All of the furniture that was set against any of those mirrored walls was lower to the ground than normal, so as not to block the view of the audience, no doubt gathered on the other side, waiting for the show to begin. A bed was straight across without sheets, just a mattress covered with a plastic protective case and a single pillow wrapped in the same material. To the left, a workbench of sorts and a storage cabinet sat, filled with all sorts of toys. The right had a display case with carefully sorted ropes and whips and chains. He'd only ever seen one performance put on at Concealed, and it'd been in a lower level room where the props hadn't been as abundant or good, but he'd requested this room for a reason. He was pleased to find the item he'd asked for was already set up and ready for use. The two of them removed their socks and shoes at the door to avoid unnecessary pauses, and Flick stacked them nicely at the side before rising. I asked them to film this, Flick shared, wanting to tell him before they entered. But I'm not as skilled with ropes as you are, so we're going to have to mix it up a bit. I have to do whatever you say anyway, Ani reminded, shifting impatiently on his feet, either from anticipation or apprehension. He latched onto Flick's wrist when the Brummel member went to take a step inside finally. Wait, you promise though, right? I do this and you'll ditch the collar? Flicks turned to block everyone's view of Aneski, imagining many of them were probably on the other side of the glass, either wondering what was taking so long or livid that the two of them were even here. He cupped Ani's cheek and thumbed the bottom of the blindfold. You submit to me in front of the live audience already watching, and I'll take that as proof I can trust you not to run. Because I'd have nowhere left to go. Exactly, baby. You do realize how twisted this is, yeah? Forcing your owners to fuck you in an uncomfortable situation just to prove a point. Are you uncomfortable? Flicks asked, dipping his finger into the waistband of Ani's jeans pointedly. Just answer the question. He clucked his tongue and hooked his finger in the material so that when he stepped back, Aneski was pulled along with him. Yes, I'm well aware this situation is as toxic as it gets. But then, so is kidnapping, wouldn't you agree? Aneski licked his lips, his shoulders tense. I can own up to the things I've done. Flicks chuckled and tugged once, hard enough Ani stumbled and slammed into his chest, blindly reaching out to grab onto his arms. What a coincidence. He lowered his mouth to the curve of his ear and dropped his voice. I can own all the things I've done too. That is not at all what I just said. It did the trick though, the corner of Ani's mouth tipping up slightly, some of the nervousness dissipating. Only to return in full force when Flicks started to undo his pants. You be good for me, Flicks reminded. Remember? Aneski swallowed and nodded his head, stepping out of the pants when Flicks pulled them down. He started lifting his hands from his sides, then seemed to think better of it and stopped, waiting for Flicks to either instruct him or remove the rest of his clothing on his own. Flicks obliged by tearing the material, buttons flying as he jostled Ani, and the younger man made a startled sound. This is your shirt, Ani said, only for Flicks to chide him back into silence. When he had his tiny terror naked, Flicks stepped back to admire him. Aneski wasn't fully aroused yet, but it wouldn't take much to get him there. You aren't getting undressed. Aneski tipped his head as if in an attempt to listen. Don't tell me you're keeping yours on, aren't you? It's not like you can see me anyway, Flicks replied. That isn't the point, or fair. Do you think all these people came to listen to us argue? His brow furrowed, only the slight curve of his dark brows visible with the blindfold on. People are also listening? Of course they are. Flicks captured his wrist and brought him forward, steering him around the item he'd requested, which was set in the center of the room. As soon as Aneski was positioned in front of it, he gave a little push, chuckling when the younger man fell back. The taut black material caught him, chains jangling as Ani latched onto them desperately. His breath caught in his throat, but he didn't struggle when Flicks reached forward and rearranged him, settling him in a seated position where he was resting back, with his head supported and his arms locked into place at either side at the wrists. The built-in straps there snapped on easily, and though Ani tugged at them lightly to check them, he still didn't complain. When his legs were spread open and curved so his knees were bent, he clenched his jaw but still kept silent. Good boy, Flicks cooed quietly, so it was clear the praise was meant to stay between the two of them and not for their audience. Keep being good for me, just like this, baby. Flick set each of Ani's legs around the outside of the chains closest and then clicked the ankle cuffs around them to keep them in place as well. Despite his earlier words, he started to undo the buttons of his shirt, mostly just as a stall tactic so he could continue to gaze at his onus, all trussed up for him. Aneski's wrists were trapped high at the side of his head, his elbows out to the sides. His body was being cradled by the swing, his knees bent past his hips with his thighs spread wide to ensure his pants were on full display. His ass hung just off the edge of the seat, and when he squirmed some, the chains attached to the ceiling holding him rattled. Is this, Aneski's dick twitched, a sex swing? Ever used one before? Flix asked, stripping the shirt off and dropping it to the floor at his feet before taking his time to undo his belt. Ani must have recognized the sound of that because he stiffened and replied, I get the feeling I should say no. Is that the truth? He snapped the belt in the air, the sound of the leather cracking causing Ani to jump. With a chuckle, he padded over to the tables, opening one of the drawers to pull out a toy and a bottle of lube. Good boys don't lie, Ani. It's not my first time using a sex swing, he admitted. But I wasn't tied to it the last time either. I just held on. Sounds boring. Flix popped open the bottle of lube, and Aneski noticeably perked up. He applied a heaping amount of the stuff to the plug he'd selected, and then brought the tip of the toy to Ani's entrance. That feels big, Aneski said nervously. Flix grinned. It is. Without any more warning, he shoved the toy inside of him all the way to the hilt and twisted it for good measure. Aneski cried out, the chains clanging as he struggled to get away from the thick plug, his sounds turning desperate the second Flix looped the silicone strap around his dick and pressed the button to turn the thrusting feature on. There, he said over the sound of Ani's curses. That'll help keep it in place. He trailed his fingers over his stomach as he walked around him, stopping at his head, then bent and rested his arms over Ani's chest, pressing their cheeks together as he peered down the length of the younger man's body. He jerked and twitched as the toy fucked repeatedly into him, his dick fully erect and weeping now. Flix glanced over at the glass and flicked one of Ani's nipples with his thumbnail. I wonder who's staring between your legs right now. Aren't you curious? Who's over there taking in the view, watching your hole get stretched and ready to receive me? He licked the curve of Ani's ear and then whispered, watching me manipulate your body, coming to the realization that this is all they'll ever get. Flix, Aneski gasped, spine bowing. I'm going to show them all who you belong to, Ani. Remember that threat I made before? I'm going to screw your mind so thoroughly you won't even consider trying to run. Every time you see someone on the street, you'll wonder if they've seen you like this, if they know what you look like when you're squirming and wetting yourself for me. Flix captured the underside of Ani's chin and tipped his head, kissing him softly. I'll make sure the entire universe knows exactly what you look like coming on my cock. You're mine, Aneski Kendricks. All mine, whether you like it or not. Chapter 21. He'd just said his name out loud. His real name. The worst part was, Ani should have seen it coming. Should have known this was going to be more than he could handle the second Flix had done his 180 and promised to free him after the hissy fit he'd been throwing for over a week. There was a reason Aneski always wore a mask and used a fake name in his videos. It was sexy knowing people were watching him and getting off to it, but he'd still needed that layer of protection to fully feel safe. To ensure he could still move freely throughout the city and on campus without catching dirty or lust-filled looks. When Flix had told him they were here to prove a point, he'd only partially believed him when other people had been mentioned. That was his second mistake. Flix wasn't the kind to make empty comments or threats. Which meant this was being filmed, and he intended to broadcast it at the Seaside Cinema. All of them? Or just the one in their city? It was a branch company, with locations all over the planet, and Aneski had been more than comfortable airing his videos at them before. But now, he was even more grateful for the blindfold, because at least there was some protection in that. even if all people had to do was look his name up online to find photos of his face. They'd know he was the one in all the other blind films now, too. "What's wrong, Ani?" Flix asked sweetly, and it was the tone that gave him away. He knew exactly what was wrong. The bastard. Aneski wanted to rant and rave at him but refrained, knowing that would only get him into more trouble. His hole was already being beaten and rubbed raw, despite the lube Flix had applied before, and the ring around his cock was tight enough that he knew he'd struggle to orgasm if it was left on. He tried to get a read on the size of the toy because, at first, with no other preparation, it felt massive. Now that he'd adjusted somewhat to it, he guessed it was probably around the same thickness as Flix, but nowhere near as long. Had he done that on purpose as well? What was he thinking? Of course Flix had. Pretty soon, Aneski would be writhing for other reasons, frustrated that it wasn't stroking in deep enough to hit all those secret places within him. Ani had always loved being filled so much there was an edge of discomfort, a slight snap of pain, that overly full feeling, the one that made him think he couldn't take it and he'd be torn in half if it kept up. That was his bliss state. And damn it, Flix knew it. The Brummel member tipped his head back a second time and traced Ani's lips with his thumb. "I don't think it's fair that you get all the fun while we wait for you to be opened up, do you?" Aneski ground his teeth. "I asked you a question, Tiny Terror," Flix stated, the whir of the machine pumping into him almost drowning out the words. They were spoken so quietly. "Since you're all about fairness all of a sudden, doesn't seem cool to leave me waiting for you, does it?" "No," he forced himself to say, narrowing his eyes behind the blindfold when Flix chuckled. "Nice of you to see reason. Now," he tapped Ani's mouth. "Open up." He wet his lips before following the order, knowing exactly what was coming. Sure enough, a second later, the heated tip of Flix's cock smacked against his lips, the salty, musky smell invading Ani's nose. "Open wide," Flix instructed, hooking a finger between Ani's lips to pry them further apart before he shoved his cock in, with the same level of care as he had the toy into Ani's ass. None at fucking all. Aneski instantly choked and struggled, but Flix caught him around the jaw, keeping him locked into place as he started slowly rocking into him, sliding his silky member against Ani's tongue and up against the back of his throat. His hands fought against the restraints in an attempt to reach out and stop the movements, but they held firm, and it wasn't long before tears leaked out of Ani's eyes and his chest constricted painfully. The angle allowed for him to go deeper than Aneski had ever taken a cock there before. Flix pulled all the way out suddenly, petting Aneski's cheeks as he gasped for air and coughed against the saliva caught in his throat. It wasn't even a full minute later that he asked, "Ready to go again?" Ani tried to shake his head, but Flix wouldn't allow that either, driving his cock back into his mouth with a fervor that had them both crying out. He kept at it until Aneski thought he was going to die, fucking his face hard and long enough his lungs were on the verge of exploding before pulling out, giving him a moment to desperately catch his breath, only to start the whole process up again. It went on like clockwork, happening so many times that Ani lost count of how frequently he was allowed to breathe. Eventually, the blindfold was soaked straight through, and he could feel his own pre-cum dripping down his spread ass cheeks. "What do you think, Ani?" Flix dragged himself out of his mouth and lowered, his breaths gusting across Aneski's wet face. "Am I better at creating content than you?" "Flix." His voice already sounded raw, and he was only able to get that one word out before he started coughing for the millionth time. "You're so red for me," Flix said then. "I wish you could see yourself, baby. See the way your pretty dick is bright, cherry red, and straining toward me. Think it knows its master?" He nuzzled his neck. "Do you?" "Yes." He bobbed his head frantically, shaking the swing even more than he already was. "Yes, I do." Flix laughed. "Want me to fuck you that badly?" "Flix, please. I have a question first." "Okay." At this point, he was too far gone to sense the trap or to even care if there was one. If it meant speeding this up and getting to feel a real cock rearranging his insides, Aneski would shamelessly do or say anything the other guy wanted. Your friends came to visit you when you were at the hospital, Flix began, speaking directly into his ear again. I got a good whiff of them, is my point, so don't bother lying in a foolish attempt to protect them. Aneski frowned. I don't understand. How many people did you let in to see me like that, honey? He asked. How many people did you show me off to? He still wasn't sure what he was getting at or why now, of all times, seemed like the appropriate time to bring it up. There was just Rexton and Bridger. Bridger came to check on you once after I knocked you out. He didn't come back again. Flix was quiet momentarily, and then, you sound like you believe that. Because it's the truth. He made a whining sound when he accidentally shifted, and the toy felt like it hit his insides a little differently. Flix, Vitessi, please. I don't know what you want from me. Just ask, and it's yours. Mine, huh? Flix grunted when Ani nodded all over again. Is that how badly you want my cock, Tiny Terror? That enough to answer all of my questions loudly? Who did he want to hear them? Obviously, there was someone or someones that Flix had in mind, but the possibilities were endless. He listened as Flix moved away, feeling an inkling of relief that at least his throat would be spared further punishment. It didn't last long, however, because then the toy was pressed in deeper and the settings were turned up, spearing the silicone dildo into him at an even faster pace. The room filled with the sounds of it squelching in and out of him, mingling with his whimpers as he thrashed on the swing as much as he was able, sending the whole thing rocking. So there was only 2 of them at the hideout then, right? Flix asked, and it took Ani longer than it should have to process the words and make sense of them. Yes, he gasped. You sure? I didn't tell anyone else or allow anyone else to go there, Ani insisted. I didn't want them to see you. Why? Flix asked curiously. They're all seeing me naked now. They would have seen me naked in that video you tried filming. That's different. How so? They would have seen you taking me in those situations. Aneski pointedly lifted his hips and whined. You like the sound of that, baby? Flix asked, his hand finally making its way to the ring around Ani's dick. He plucked at it, then took pity and moved for the thrusting part of the toy, slowly removing it. Aneski heard him step to the side and felt Flix's hand on his knee, spreading him open even more. Was he showing him off to the audience? Were they staring at his gaping hole right now? He should feel embarrassed, but instead the thought of people getting visual proof of how badly he wanted Flix made him tingly all over. Because, yeah, he did like the sound of that. Like the sound of Flix showing him around and presenting him as a prized possession. It felt like he was finally being acknowledged as his onus. Plus, it sure as shit beat being locked up in a gilded cage for the rest of his life. Flix pulled the attached ring off next, and then the sound of the toy dropping carelessly to the hard floor echoed in the room. Whose cock are you about to take, Ani? He licked his lips in anticipation as he felt the swing being lifted, his ass brought up an inch or so. Yours. Flix brought himself right up against Ani's tender entrance, but paused without even putting in the head. You're wearing a blindfold, though. Maybe you're picturing someone else. What? Aneski frowned. No, why would I do that? I just want you. It's always been you. Really? Yes. He wiggled his hips. Flix, do you want me to beg more? I can, tell me. Flix laughed, but he sounded pleased, not mocking, which meant Ani was on the right track. Vitessi, he continued, hoping to grab onto that thread and make Flix happy enough to finally fuck him. I want you so bad. I need you. Please? The toy wasn't big enough. Didn't hit me deep enough. Only you can fuck me right. Your cock is the best. I bet they'd like it. Like what? Flix eased his crown past that ring of muscle, stopping as soon as a blissed sound slipped out of Ani, the buzz momentarily purging his mind of anything and everything. What would they like, baby? Who? Oh, right. Their audience. They were talking about the audience. Seeing your cum dripping from my abused hole, Oneski replied, sure painting that particular picture would do the trick and earn him. He howled when Flix drove into him, the swing arching in the air as the Brumo member controlled it. His cock pushed past any lingering resistance, driving in as deep as it could possibly get so that Ani felt the pressure all the way to his abdomen. Say my name, Ani, Flix ordered as he pulled Oneski on and off of him, his hips thrusting forward and back in a sharp motion that had him stuffed to the hilt, and then all the way out in the next instant. Whenever Oneski was empty, his insides clenched, and he made a sound of desperation. You don't have to be polite, Flix added, and Ani only caught on because his subconscious knew he'd be punished again if he didn't. Flix wanted his actual name this time, not Patesi. He wanted everyone to hear Oneski call it and for there to be no mistaking who he was referring to. That was fine. Easy. He could do that. Give him that. So long as Flix kept giving him his cock in return. He cried it out like a mantra over and over again, Flix's name on repeat, growing more and more frantic sounding with each passing breath. His muscles ached from the forced position and he was starting to regret the blindfold after all, wishing he could see Flix's body pounding into his, see if Flix was enjoying it as much as he was. Who do you belong to? Flix demanded. You. He could feel how close he was, his balls drawing tight. His dick slapped between them from the rough motions, but he didn't think he'd even need to be touched there to reach orgasm. Flix, have you ever wanted anyone else? Literally never. True. True enough. If he were in his right state of mind, he'd probably blush. But what did it matter now? Who cared if the whole world knew he'd always had an obsession with the man wildly and publicly, claiming him? So all those other people you spread these thighs for meant nothing, Ani insisted. Who was your first again? You. Even if the prick couldn't recall, he'd set aside his irritation over that for later. That's right, and I'm going to be your last. The second Flix's fingers brushed against Oneski's swollen dick, he exploded. Cum shot all over them in waves as he thrashed through it, the orgasm so intense there were sparks of white light behind his covered eyes, and his back arched. The sensations of Flix thrusting in and out of him only drew it on until he was sobbing and begging and no longer understood what he was even pleading for anymore. Flix plugged him up one last time, screwing into him so he could feel the sharp press of his hip bones against the backs of his thighs, and then he growled as he emptied. How's that feel? Hot, Ani said, like you're searing my insides and burning me alive. That so? Don't stop, he rushed on. Give me all of it, I want it. Flix groaned at that and obliged. Chapter 22. Flix helped Ani down from the swing, holding onto him as he wobbled. When the younger guy dropped his forehead beneath Flix's chin, he made a comforting sound in the back of his throat and ran his fingers through his damp hair soothingly. Do you want to see anyone? Flix asked once he was sure Oneski was able to speak again and was steadier on his feet. Anyone? Yeah. He motioned over his shoulder toward the center mirrored wall, where he was blocking whoever was standing there's view of Ani. The audience? With the blindfold still in place, it was hard to tell if Ani was frowning. Do you? I have to greet a few people quickly, Flix said, but you don't have to come with me. Can I take the blindfold off? Instead of answering, Flix gently undid the tie at the back of Ani's head and pulled the material away, lifting a hand to shield his eyes from the harsh overhead lighting when he initially winced against it. Slowly. Adjust slowly. Aneski blinked and glanced down. You're still wearing your pants. I never took them off, he replied, laughing when Ani glared at that revelation. Would you like me to get yours, Tiny Terror? I can manage, he grumbled, waving toward the exit. Go see who you've got to see so we can get out of here. Embarrassed? Ani snorted and stepped in closer, more like eager to get back home so you can fuck me again. He reached around and grabbed a handful of Flix's ass, smirking. So hurry up, Patessi. If I get too tired, I might refuse you later. You think you can? I think I can try. Flix grinned. That might actually be fun. Aneski shoved him away with a laugh and immediately started searching for his clothes. Go on. It was difficult to walk away and tempting to go another round here, but Flix had made his point already, and there was no need for a continued public spectacle now that he had. There was a hidden door set in the glass to the left, which he'd been told about earlier, and he made his way toward it, watching Ani's reflection move about the room, collecting his things. He was slow going, clearly sore from their rough play, and Flix made a note to run a bath for him as soon as they were home. The second he planted his palm against the glass door and pushed it, a crowd of people rushed back, giving him room to enter. He'd left the viewing open, so anyone who had an upper-level membership had been given access, though when he did a quick scan, it seemed like only 20 or so people had been watching in total. To his left was the rest of the room, and he turned, seeking out the guests he'd sent invites to before leaving the house with Ani, spotting them in the center in front of the middle wall, where they had the best view. Are you crying? Flix didn't bother trying to sound kind as he passed Gannon, who was standing by himself. He'd been the only member of Ani's friend group that Flix had sent the invite to, and he used Aneski's multi-slate to do it. But he was still a little surprised to see he'd actually come on his own. Gannon looked like he wanted to strangle him, rubbing at his eyes and glaring. His cheeks were red, and he was so obviously upset that if Flix were a better person, he might feel a little bad for how extremely he'd taken things. Looks like you kept it a secret from Ani, huh? Flix said. He had no clue you'd visited us at the hideaway. He'd recognized the smell of the man who'd come in just before Ani had tried his hand at making that video. It'd been Gannon. Scurrying around his back like a rat, your hobby or something? Gannon glanced between him and back into the room where Aneski was almost fully clothed. I was worried about him, that's all. I'm not like you. Like me? Flix pretending to think it over and hummed in agreement. That's right, because Ani actually wants me. He smirked triumphantly. Rid yourself of those delusions while I'm still being kind enough to allow you to. Fail to do so, and I'll end you, whether you're Ani's friend or not. That was all he'd wanted. The only reason he'd summoned the guy here under the guise of the invite having come from Aneski. Flix had needed him to see the two of them fucking, to see the way Ani responded to him and get it through his thick skull that would never happen between the two of them. You have no right to do any of this to him, Gannon said, causing Flix to turn back briefly when he started walking away. He's only with you because... Don't be dense, Flix warned. It's pathetic. We both know how he feels and which of us he'd choose. Quit being a sore loser and move the fuck on already before I lose my patience and pluck out those pining eyes of yours. He walked away before Gannon could respond, point made. Hell, the point should have been made already with how loudly he'd had Ani screaming for him just now, but some people really couldn't take a hint, no matter how hard they were bashed over the head with it. The next person Flix needed to see was waiting not far from where he'd been talking with Gannon, the blonde already looking sheepish as Flix approached. Use? Is that seriously your onus? Saint, who was standing next to Use, let out a low whistle. Why does he look so familiar? Just not the face. Use held up his hands and requested, I've got a modeling gig tomorrow, and Flix didn't let him finish, slamming his fist into Use's stomach. Saint cursed as his friend caved in on himself, and then again when Flix moved away so Hughes could no longer lean on him for support and toppled to the ground. What the hell? Saint glanced between the two of them. Why did you do that? Flix crouched next to Hughes, who was lying on his side, clutching his middle. Want to explain to Saint what you did wrong? I messed around with the leader of the shepherds, Hughes mumbled. Holy shit. Saint clearly hadn't known, even though the two of them were the closest. The crowd who was observing also seemed surprised by the news, but Flix didn't pay them any mind. What were you thinking? Saint scowled. Sleeping with the enemy is some traitorous bull. Betesi? Aneski called to him and entered the room. He'd put his clothes back on but left the shirt unbuttoned, not the least bit perturbed by the people staring as he made his way toward Flix. Saint gasped and covered his mouth with both hands almost comically, glancing between Flix and Ani a few times. He was busy on his multi-slate when you took the blindfold off, Hughes told Flix, who grunted. He's seeing someone. Hopefully he's a better judge than you are and isn't moving in on someone else's man, Flix drawled. Hughes slowly sat up, still holding his stomach protectively. I didn't know. If you'd mentioned you were fucking a shepherd, you would have. But now that you're aware... Whoa, it was just sex, I swear. There were no feelings involved, ever. I'll keep my distance from now on, Hughes rushed to say. Why? Aneski came to a stop next to Flix. Aren't we all friends now? He took in the scene and then tilted his head. Did you hit him? For what? You know what. He stood. We're doing a re-release of Bind Volumes 2 and 3, reshooting them both. Once he'd read the message from Hughes, it'd been fairly easy to figure out and recognize him as the man Ani had fucked in those movies. That? Ani had the nerve to chuckle. That was just work. Why are you so upset about it? Hughes was just my acting partner. He sent the blonde on the ground an apologetic look. Sorry you got punched because of me. He's lucky I didn't break his hands, Flix said. And what did I tell you about talking to other people while we're here? I was doing so on your behalf, Ani replied. It doesn't count. Clever and so absolutely insufferable. Hughes shot to his feet and dipped his head in a bow, but before he could say anything, Saint discovered his voice again. Your Onus is the leader of the shepherds? Does Baikel... He knows. Flix cut him off. We'll get going now. Hughes moved to walk past him, but Flix moved his foot in the way, tripping him so that he stumbled into Saint, almost taking him down. Seriously? Ani scolded. So childish. Want to come a little closer and repeat that? Flix suggested, only to have him roll his eyes. Did you see your friend on your way in? The tent in his pants was impossible to miss. Who? Ani glanced around the room with a frown. The only people I know in here are you and Hughes. Gannon was here a moment ago. Odd. Maybe the guy had run off to cry somewhere. Honestly, Flix couldn't completely blame him. It'd be weirder if people weren't attracted to a guy as sexy as Aneski. But looking and touching were two different things, and it'd been blatantly obvious that Gannon had been holding out hope for the latter for a long time. Best to nip that in the bud sooner rather than later, otherwise Flix would be hitting someone else, and he wouldn't just stop at one punch. It is, right? One of the strangers nearby asked his friend, not overly loudly, but still clearly enough to be heard by Flix. That's the guy from the Bind movies. Hey! He stepped forward quickly, dropping a hand on Aneski's shoulder. Looks like you have a type. How about you give me a ride? Ani shoved his arm off him and turned defensively, but the guy didn't seem to care. Come on, he pointed to his head. I'm blonde. Doesn't that mean you'll fuck me? Bet I'll be better at it then. The idiot shut up abruptly, probably due to the blade tip sticking out from the center of his throat. Pavel Hart, the owner of the club, peered around the gurgling man and nodded at Flix. My apologies. There are rules here that all VIP members should know better than to break. He must have scampered in with someone. I was letting him dig a deeper hole and then planned on breaking his kneecaps and making him crawl down the 50 flights of stairs to the lobby, but Flix shrugged. That works too. I apologize again, Pavel said. Your plan sounds like it would have been much more entertaining than the solution I came up with. Aneski scowled and crossed his arms. You two seem rather chummy. Didn't realize you were this close with members of the retinue, Batesi. Kinda hypocritical. Hitting yous while having relations with Pavel Hart. I've never screwed Pavel, Flix pointed out. Your boyfriend isn't my type, the retinue member of Topic reassured Ani, who merely narrowed his eyes. Make sure it stays that way. Aneski didn't back down even when Pavel's empty gaze stuck to him for a lengthy moment. I see why you're the leader of the shepherds. He pulled the knife he'd slid into the back of the blonde guy's neck free, the body toppling to the ground in a lifeless heap at his feet. Then he snapped his fingers and waved over his shoulder once, two large bouncers stepping from a shadowy corner of the room to deal with it. You have an interesting onus, Flix. He's pretty great, Flix agreed. Yeah, thanks for letting us use the room. Pavel chuckled. You shouldn't bother with that. Aren't you curious how much money you made me with that show you put on? Everyone here paid a hefty sum the second they found out one of the Brummel satellite was performing. Are you saying that guy knew who Flix was and still tried hitting on Aneski? Saint pointed at the dead body being carried away and let out a low whistle. Damn. That's a special kind of stupid, the Hughes agreed, clearing his throat when Flix looked at him pointedly. Would you look at the time? Saint shoved Hughes toward the exit. We've got to be on our way. Great atmosphere as always, Pav. Only enriched by the impromptu murder, Flix teased, though Pavel merely nodded. I agree. He took a glance around at the remaining people still in the viewing room, all of which were now giving them a wide berth. Everyone else here is on the VIP list, and I'm familiar with their faces. If you're all right with ending this matter here, yeah. Flix waved him off. However, he addressed the room. Feel free to spread the word about my possessiveness over my onus. The next person who tries to touch what's mine will get worse than a knife through the jugular. Got it? There was a resounding yes and head bobbing. Satisfied he'd made all the points, he held out a hand to Ani. Anywhere else you want to go since we're out? Shut up and take me home already, Aneski growled. Your cum is ruining my pants. I'll buy you more. Hell yeah, you will. Ani pulled him in close and then announced huskily, after you put a couple more loads in me. A couple, huh? We're going all night. Flix cocked his head. Like seeing me jealous, Tiny Terror? Absolutely love it. It was such a messed up thing to admit to, and yet Aneski didn't so much as bat an eyelash when he did. Going all night and well into the morning sounded better. Chapter 23. I can do this on my own, Aneski complained as they pulled into the driveway of the Shepherd house. He'd been dragged out of bed an hour ago and would have been crankier if not for the phenomenal shower sex Flix had treated him to before telling him what was on the day's agenda. What? Too embarrassed to be seen with me after last night? Flix teased, undoing his seatbelt. That's not it. Though, admittedly, it was going to be a bit more difficult to look his friends in the eye, knowing at least one of them had seen him climax. It shouldn't make a difference whether it was on the screen or in real life, and yet it somehow did. He'd never been bothered thinking about Cage jerking off to his movies, but he felt a flood of embarrassment whenever he thought back to the boner supposedly in Gannon's pants last night. Remember how I was onto you? Flix said, lifting a brow when Ani frowned at him. I don't know what you're talking about. He really didn't. You can't escape me, Tiny Terror. Oh, that. His half-assed plan to seduce Flix and then leave him in the middle of the night. Flix's eyes narrowed, and Aneski shrugged. It feels like 1,000,000 years ago I considered maybe trying to do that to you. Things are different now. That's so. Yeah, he said. For once, all of the broom will know I'm your onus after yesterday. Even if I wanted to run, I'd have to invest in one hell of a good disguise in order to sneak out of the city, and even then, I'd still find you. Exactly. The Brumo Mafia's network held its home base in Valio, but they had branches all over the planet. If he really wanted to leave, he'd have to attempt boarding a spaceship to do so and try his luck in a different part of the galaxy, or another galaxy entirely. Not only did he lack the funds for a trip like that, he also had no desire to flee the only home he'd ever known. This is where I belong. I'm not going anywhere. Flick stared at him for a moment and then hummed and reached for the door. One step at a time. He wondered if they were ever going to get to a place where they trusted one another again. In the past, there'd been no one else Aneski could count on more than the blonde currently making his way to the front door of the Shepherd house like he had a right to it. Flicks was bold and attentive and, when he wanted to be, the kindest person in the universe. But he was also abrasive and distrustful and petty. Last night was a clear reminder of that fact. Ani had been trying to find the right time to mention his past arrangement with Hughes, knowing eventually would come to light, but he'd never in a million years anticipated that reaction from Flicks. Gannon had been tossed into the mix as an afterthought. It'd been obvious the show Flicks had made them put on last night had been for Hughes more than anyone else. A warning and also a statement. One that had still resulted in Hughes getting punched at the end. If Flicks was willing to do that to his friends, there was no telling what he'd do to Ani's if pushed too far. Hey, Ani clapped a hand over his shoulder to stop him just as they made it to the porch. Maybe I should go first. The door swung open before Flicks could reply, an angry Rexton standing there glaring. What the hell do you think you're doing here? I invited him. Aneski stepped past Flicks and pushed his way into the house, jostling Rex pointedly. It wasn't the nicest thing to do, but he had to establish himself here quickly in case there were other shepherds present within the home. His friends he could talk to and convince, but the rest of the gang would be more difficult. Though they all knew in reality the shepherds were nothing compared to the major organization that the Brummel was, most of their members were university students who liked to joke about besting the Brummel in the streets. They certainly wouldn't take learning about their leader leaving them to be with one of those members lightly. A part of Ani felt a bit badly about that, but if he were being truthful, he'd never intended to stick with the shepherds for life anyway. This had been about avenging his brother and taking back what he'd viewed as stolen. He'd done that. It was time to move on. But how to explain that to his friends and the rest in a way that would result in the least amount of fighting? This was why he'd wanted to come alone. Flicks was a distraction and a glaring red flag, even more so when he was standing in the corner of the living room, acting like he didn't notice the two guys warily eyeing him. I'm picking up some things, Aneski said, breaking the silence. He smiled at Bridger, seated at the dining room table studying. You're going back with him? Rexton practically snarled. You're joking. He isn't, Flicks replied, not helping. Ani sent him a look that screamed, please shut up, and then turned back to his friends, who were all closely watching the exchange. We should probably talk. Not with him, Rex said. Bridger cleared his throat and rose from the table, making his way over with his hands in his pockets. Maybe we should take this upstairs. Yeah, Ani agreed, glancing at Flicks. My room is upstairs. Let me go pack and talk with them. Alone. Rexton shook Bridger off when he tried to calm him down. Flicks thought it over, and for a moment Aneski feared he was going to say no and stick to him like glue after all. But in the end, he shrugged and lowered down onto the center of the faded leather couch. Take your time. You don't want to forget anything. Thanks. Aneski sighed in relief. Remember your toothbrush, he called when Ani was halfway up the stairs. You can't keep using mine. You've been sharing a toothbrush? Rexton looked disgusted. Man, just go. Bridger shoved him up the steps. What's up? Cage came out of his room when they made it to the top, peering down to the living room, though he couldn't see Flicks from that vantage. I'm here to get my things, Ani said, walking down the hall. And explain. It's going to take hours to do that, Rexton insisted. The four of them swarmed into Ani's room, Bridger gently shutting the door at their backs as though to add a layer of protection between them and the Brummel member. Don't worry, Ani reassured, grabbing a duffel from the closet. He isn't going to eavesdrop. How can you be so sure? Rexton demanded to know. Because if he asks me what we spoke about, I'll just tell him. He shrugged. Damn. Cage dropped into the seat at Ani's desk. Next, you're going to tell us he'll be bringing you to and from school. They hadn't discussed it yet, but that was a fairly good assumption. Knowing Flix's personality, that was most likely going to be one of the things Ani was going to have to agree to. And he would. Getting chauffeured by a Brummel member? Not exactly a hardship. Why are you moving out? Because he told you to, or because you want to? Bridger questioned, a lot calmer than their still seething friend Rex, who was busy pacing back and forth. A little bit of both. He didn't want to outward lie to them, but Aneski hadn't been the one who'd suggested moving in right away either. He wasn't a fan of jumping ship like this so spur of the moment. If he'd had a say, he would have asked for a week to tie everything up and leave the gang on good terms, but he also understood where Flix was coming from. It was his own damn fault for pushing the Brummel member and making him think he was a flight risk in the first place. If their roles were reversed, Ani didn't think he'd be able to trust Flix living in a separate house either. He'd be too worried about him pulling a vanishing act, or finding someone else, or coming to his senses and... When are you coming back to class? Cage asked. I'm not sure. He was gearing up for that topic. He figured once they were done here and he'd shown Flix he was willing, it'd be a better time to bring up school and how badly he wanted to return. We haven't come to an agreement yet. He's acting like he's your dad, Rexton growled. Hey, if Aneski wants to call his man daddy, I'm about to call my man up here so he can shoot you in the dick. Aneski sent Cage a warning look, chuckling when his friend made a motion of zipping his lips and then held up both hands in surrender. Anyway, it's already done. I've been named his onus, which means I can't live here anymore, and I can't remain a part of the gang. Why not? Cage blinked when they all sent him pointed stares. What? Oh, come on. We're not an actual threat to the Mafia. If we were, they would have taken us out a long time ago. Why does it actually matter if you're a member? Hell, if anything, you'd think that would be a good thing. Give them a literal foot in the door so they can keep a better eye on us. Bridger sighed, and Rexton shook his head. You're such an idiot, Rex mumbled. Sometimes I seriously wonder what Bridge sees in you. I have a nice ass, Cage answered, like it was no big deal and he wasn't kind of insulting himself. We're heading to Void Manor after this, Ani said then, wanting to get them back on track. So we'll see how that goes, but I plan on telling Michael Void that I quit. Meaning, one of you is going to have to step up and take over my position. No way, Rexton stated. We're not doing that. You don't just get to abandon us and... Bridger pulled Rex back and gave Ani an apologetic look. Don't worry, we'll talk some sense into him and figure something out to say to the rest of the gang. We understand. We do not, Rex insisted. This is your choice, Cage added, then scrunched his nose at Rexton. Stop acting like a little bitch. Aneski has wanted to be with Flix for as long as I've known him, and now he's finally getting his wish. What kind of friend tries to block the fulfillment of a lifelong wish? He can't be trusted, Rexton said. He ditched you once. Who's to say he won't do it again? The circumstances are different now. Ani kept packing, refusing to meet any of their gazes. On the one hand, a part of him did truly believe that, but on the other, it was hard to set aside old fears. Flix playing with him? That thought had been circulating in his mind for so long now that it was practically ingrained in his subconscious. But it was that fear that also allowed him to relate to why Flix was tightening the reins so much. He's just as afraid of me betraying him, he explained. We're working on it. Because at the end of the day, no relationship would last without trust. They just had to get there again, find that place where they were both comfortable and believed in the other without hesitation or suspicion. I don't know how long it'll take, but it's enough that we're both willing to try. And making you have sex with him in front of a live audience? Rexton snapped. That was meant to help rebuild trust? Gannon came home a mess. Gannon deserved it, Bridger pointed out. Yeah, Cage agreed. It was harsh, but someone needed to get it through to him once and for all that Ineski just isn't into him. You know how many perfectly good relationships he's turned down over the years just because he was holding out hope? He clucked his tongue. This will be a blessing in disguise for him. Let's set a meeting for the end of the week, Ineski suggested. I'll come by and we can name a new leader. That will give you guys time to figure out which one of you wants the job. And him time to convince Flix to let him attend on his own. A week should be enough time for him to prove himself, prove that he had no intentions of running, and Flix could let him roam the city without any doubts. What about Russ? Rexton asked. What about him? Ineski tossed the bundle of letters into his bag. He would leave them behind. Only Flix wanted to read them. He'd gone over every one of them himself when he'd received them from Gannon, each more cutting than the last. That's it? You're just going to forget all about him? Let me ask you this honestly. He straightened and turned to his oldest friend. Name 3 times my brother ever did anything for me that proved he gave a shit. Rexton's brow furrowed. You can't, can you? Ani blew out a breath. Yeah, neither could I once I really stopped to think about it. He chuckled, the sound empty and humorless. What exactly have I been chasing all this time? Revenge? For a brother who left me behind without a second glance? What about the letters? Bridger crossed his arms. Didn't Gannon say those were from Flix? He smiled bitterly. There are 5 in total, and they're not from Flix. Russ wrote them. Want to know what they say? Yeah. Cage went to reach over the bed toward the bag, but Bridger grabbed his collar and hoisted him back. He was asking for money. Each and every one of them mentioned it. They got more and more angry as they went on too, with the last one basically just Russ calling him ungrateful and telling him they were no longer related. He disowned me in the end. The guy Ineski had been trying all of this time to get closure for had been living on the other side of the globe, perfectly content without him. There'd been no mention of the shepherds, or how they were doing, or of Haroon and the things he'd done. Russ hadn't even asked once how Ani was. What a waste. Ani dropped down on the edge of the bed and rested his head in his hands, feeling the full weight of how pathetic he'd been now that he was finally talking about it. It'd been a lot prior to now, with him finding Flix afterward and stabbing himself for attention. He'd been desperate, though. Desperate to cling to the last good thing he had from back then. His brother and their bond had been a lie, and after realizing that Ani hadn't been able to deal with the thought of his relationship with Flix also having been one. I knew we weren't close, he continued. But I thought, I don't know, we're brothers? I thought that meant something. It does, Bridger tried to reassure, but Ani wouldn't hear it. I'm done tricking myself into thinking something that isn't true, just because it's easier to live with than the alternative. Russ took me in after our dad died because he had to, but he was never around. I thought he was working, but it turns out that wasn't true either. What do you mean? Rexton's frown deepened. It's all in the letters. He asked me for money, even gave suggestions on how I could get it. But didn't he leave you with a ton of coin? Cage asked. That's how you're paying for school, isn't it? He was silent, and after a moment Bridger put the pieces together. It didn't come from Russ, did it? His friend swore and sat down next to him. I'm sorry, man. Do you know who gave it to you then? Cage glanced away when Bridge glared at him. I have an idea. There was only one person in Ineski's life who had that kind of funding and would have been willing to piss it all away on someone like him. Flix. Rexton leaned back against the desk, clearly shocked by this revelation. He really did that? Cage let out a low whistle. Is it too late to ask him to be my daddy too? Bridger leaned over the bed and snatched his earlobe. Excuse you? Kidding. Ow! Have any of you spoken to Gannon about last night? Ani hadn't seen him, which meant he must have left immediately after talking to Flix. Other than when he came in crying and answered where he'd been, no. Bridger sat back up. Why? I'd give him some space. You know how he can be. I was just curious if you saw what happened with Pavelhart, that's all. The retinue member? Cage sounded intrigued. What happened with him? He murdered someone in front of all of us for hitting on me. There was another moment of silence, and then Cage said, Wow, they really are different from us, aren't they? The Shepherds were never going to be anything more than a laughingstock to people like the Brummel and the retinue, Bridger confirmed with a sigh. But that's fine. None of us joined this gang to take it seriously. Actually, Cage said, if Aneski is leaving, couldn't we all just go? I thought you liked living here, Aneski frowned. I do, but mostly because I like living with you guys. The rest of the gang members are annoying. He's not wrong, Rexton chuckled. Maybe we should just disband. That all sounds well and good, Bridger, ever the voice of reason, stated. However, someone would take over the gambling dens we abandoned. Not to mention, who will people turn to if they need a safe loan option? We handle that now, and a good chunk of this community actually relies on us. Bridger was in charge of the books, so he'd know better than the rest of them. Aneski, having only been in this for his brother and to get to Flix, hadn't really paid much attention other than to ensure it was all running. Cool. So we stay. Cage shrugged. You came to that decision so easily, Rexton drawled. Why not? Why overcomplicate things when they don't need to be? That was a very valid point. Sometimes you can be pretty smart. It's not just your ass, Aneski found himself saying, elaborating when his friend seemed confused. Why Bridger is with you? It's not just because of your ass. Want to see it? Cage got off the bed and reached for the waistband of his shorts, stopped only when Bridge lunged for him. Okay, Rexton corrected for Ani. It's mostly because of his ass. The four of them burst into laughter, the tension finally draining away. Chapter 24. What are those? Kaz plucked one of the faded envelopes off the table and pulled out the letter without waiting for Flix to give him the okay. After reading only the first few lines, he scowled and tossed it back into the pile, not bothering to slide the letter back into place. What a waste of space. He, Michael, and Flix were sitting on campus in the West Quad, an area surrounded by bamboo forest. The school had cleared a good circular portion, and tables had been set up for students to study and hang out. The path leading back to the main parts of campus were fairly short, and they could see the art building from where they were seated. If the art program here was even half as good as the one at Guest, Flix might have played with the idea of having Ani transfer, but as it were, he'd interfered with the guy's future career enough. Last night, after returning from the shepherd's home, they'd come to an agreement about school. Flix would drive Ani to and from, and Ani wasn't allowed to go anywhere off campus until Flix came to pick him up. He had no idea how long that rule would last, but for now Flix needed that peace of mind, especially since he couldn't stop thinking about all the sharp objects his tiny terror would be around. They couldn't live like this, though, always on edge, wondering when the other shoe would drop. Flix wanted to believe that the stabbing had been a spur-of-the-moment one-off, a really shitty error in judgment that would never happen again. After reading the letters Russ sent, it was more believable. If he'd been in Ani's shoes, he'd probably have a mental crisis afterward, too. Are these from Russ? Michael selected one more carefully but didn't open it, reading the address scrawled on the front instead. He sent them to their old apartment? This all of them? Kaz asked. There aren't many. Perhaps they lost touch. They stopped coming long before Ani moved, Flix informed them. Russ got pissy when he didn't receive a response fast enough for his liking. The last one is filled with curse words. He even disowned him. You were supposed to bring your onus by last night, Michael reminded, setting the letter down to sip at the to-go coffee he'd brought along. Why'd plans change? Flix had taken Aneski out for lunch afterward instead, and then shopping. The second Ani had come down the stairs carrying only a single duffel, he texted Michael letting him know they wouldn't be making it. Still settling him in, he ended up replying, quirking a brow over at the table next to theirs at the students who were clearly staring. There were 2 guys and a female, none of whom Flix was familiar with. They weren't only interested in him, their gaze pinging back and forth between all 3 of them, but they'd been there even before Flix had arrived, and it was clear their lunch trays had been picked clean a while ago. "Keep your eyes to yourself," Flix snapped. "We're all taken." Kaz snorted, and Michael's eyes widened slightly before he got a hold of himself. The group quickly collected their things and rushed off, leaving them alone with just 2 other students at tables further away. "Someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning," Kaz said. "Where'd the fun-loving, charming guy we're all familiar with go?" "You are meant to be the nice one," Michael agreed, but changed the subject. "So, what are you going to do about Russ then? Does your owner still want you to find him, or has he given up after reading these gems?" He tapped a finger against the letters. "Personally, I say find him," Kaz stated, "and rip his head clean off. Does Aneski paint? You could provide him with some new materials." "Are you suggesting he gives him his brother's blood to use as paint?" Michael clucked his tongue, but it was impossible to tell if he found that idea interesting or ridiculous. "What about the people you sent to find him before?" "They're still searching," Flix admitted. "Apparently Russ is better at hiding than we gave him credit for. Go figure." "Well, he had to be good at something." "I never understood why you were friends with someone like that." Kaz grabbed a fruit slice from the open carton in front of Flix and ate it. "He always seemed like an idiot to me." "Well, at first I just felt bad for him," Flix admitted. "Plus, Cal wanted me to keep an eye on things when he formed the Shepherds." Michael shrugged. They didn't seem like a threat, but it was worth sticking close to. Flix's friendship with one of the founding members made it easier, not that anything useful ever came of it. Probably because someone allowed himself to get distracted early on. Flix didn't even try to deny it. "I stuck around for Ani," he confirmed. He had no idea how shitty his brother really was. All those times Russ was out of the house, he'd lie and tell Aneski he was working. Really, he was just fucking around with the Shepherds, trying to establish themselves on the streets. Basically, just wasting his time. At least he kept up with his studies. "Sure," Kaz drawled. "Which you were paying for." Russ had all but begged Flix to help him through school after their father's death had left them destitute. Knowing that if Russ failed, Aneski would suffer, he'd done so with little hesitation. "You should have removed him from that home from the very beginning," Michael said then. "Claimed Aneski and kicked his deadweight brother to the curb. Then all of this could have been avoided." "He never would have come with me back then if I tried that," Flix disagreed, only for the cousins to both grunt at him. "You really think that?" Kaz asked. "Even now? You're usually more attentive. Does this mean everyone becomes an idiot when they fall for someone?" "No," Michael stated. "Just you." Casimir's eyes narrowed, but his cousin's gaze shifted around him, and he turned to spot Rabbit entering the wide path. "I guess we'll see in a moment, won't we?" They waited for Rabbit to reach them, quiet for a full minute. Once he had, he ended up standing at the end of the table, between Flix and Kaz, instead of bothering to sit in the spot across from Michael that was empty. "Are you finished with practice?" Michael asked. "Just got done," Rabbit replied. "You should have texted me. I would have come to get you. I wanted to ask Flix if he and Aneski would join us for dinner." Flix quirked a brow. "That's so. It wouldn't hurt to get him out of the house," Rabbit said. "And you were supposed to come yesterday anyway. Why not tonight?" "So it's a formal dinner, then?" "Not really," he shrugged. "We're just eating." "Why haven't you invited Nate and me to dinner?" Casimir scowled. "I'm friends with Aneski," Rabbit explained. "It's been a long time since he and I have gotten together. It would be nice to catch up." He glanced over at Michael, and even though his expression never wavered, it was clear he was silently asking the Brummel leader for help. "Come," Michael unsurprisingly ordered. And he motioned to his cousin. "If you're so upset about it, show up with your onus as well." As long as you're all gone before 10. Rabbit has a show tomorrow, and Something glared from within the bamboo stalks, catching Flix's attention and distracting him from listening to the rest of what Michael was saying. If not for that single beam of sunlight catching the metallic object aimed their way, he wouldn't have noticed anyone hiding within the forest at all. His brain registered that it was a blaster a second too late, the sound of the gun going off, ripping through the air a second before a bullet sailed toward them. Right at Rabbit. Even after years and years of working around his secret, of keeping it hush and not letting himself slip in front of anyone ever, no matter the circumstances, Flix found himself acting on impulse. Without thought, his left hand shot out, bolts of bluish-white electricity sparking from the tips of his fingers, even as his free hand latched onto Rabbit's arm and pulled him out of the way. The lightning bolts zapped forward, connecting with the bullet when it was only a couple of feet from them. It exploded into a rain of silver dust. The other two students who'd been studying screamed and rushed out of the forest. Casimir rushed into action, spotting the shooter within the trees and racing after him, pulling his own weapon and letting off a round that sent wood bursting and scattering. He chased after the shooter when he ran deeper into the woods without checking to see if any of them were tagging along. They were not. Rabbit was too busy getting a hold of himself, and Michael was in the process of staring Flix down, as though the two of them had never met before. I can explain. Flix held up his hands, and then dropped them, swearing. Fuck. Michael set his gaze on Rabbit. You knew. I have no interest in your position, Flix quickly said. I only kept it a secret to avoid any misunderstandings. Void, he just saved my life, Rabbit reminded, only for his boyfriend to narrow his eyes. You and I are going to discuss this later, Michael stated. Alone. As for you, Flix, you have until Casimir returns to explain everything. If you fail to do so, our friendship be damned. I'll act as a Dominus should. It was actually kind of him to give Flix the chance at all, seeing as how he'd only just taken over his father's position as Dominus of the Brummel. There were many who were still challenging Michael's leadership, being difficult on the sidelines while pretending to be supportive. They'd spent the past couple of months trying to weed them out, but it was time-consuming. Knowing there was a second shout with powers amongst them would potentially present another option for the role, which wouldn't be good for Michael's claim. Still, those who were opposed typically used his young age as the reasoning, so jumping to Flix wouldn't make much of a difference. I can create and manipulate electricity, Flix began. For how long? A while now. Who else knows? Just my Onus and Rabbit. Michael narrowed his eyes. You're trying to protect your parents. If you lie to me again, they're loyal, he insisted. That's part of the reason they wanted me to keep it from you in the first place. If you didn't trust me, you'd send me away, and I can't help you if I'm on the other side of the planet. Michael considered that, and then moved on to the next question. How do you leech? Little by little, here and there. The fires. It clicked for him. That's why you're so into starting them. It's not because you're a pyromaniac at all, is it? No. Flix could care less about starting fires, but it'd been a good excuse to use a necessary fib so he could expel larger amounts of the pent-up energy without it being suspicious. I can go a month without draining any power, but it's difficult and risky. Hey! Kaz called out then, stepping from the forest. He was dragging someone by their shirt across the ground, leaving droplets of blood in their wake. Flix held his breath and waited for Michael to pass his verdict now that time was up. Their talk had been brief, but they'd mostly covered everything of import, so hopefully it would be enough. Michael remained quiet for a while, only speaking when Kaz had almost reached them. You're lucky you saved my possessio, he clipped. We aren't done talking about this, but for now, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and believe you. Thank you. Flix blew out a breath, then frowned when he turned and recognized the man in Kaz's hold despite the broken nose and busted lip. Ganon? Yeah, no. What was that? Kaz glared at Flix's hand. He's an active shout. Michael filled him in, stoic when his cousin glanced between them questioningly. And we're all right with that development? It's not like anything can be done about it. We could... Are you about to suggest murdering our friend? Casimir scowled. Of course not. I was going to say we could use another shout around here. Take some of the load off. Flix blinked, completely caught off guard by that statement. Besides, Kaz added, Nate would kill me if I did anything to Flix. Oh, that made way more sense. Casimir, like the rest of them, was more afraid of pissing off his owners than he was of Flix staging any sort of coup. That was a relief. It's not like Flix has ever wanted to become the Dominus anyway, Kaz shrugged. You owe me a fight in the ring for keeping this a secret, though. You should still bleed a little for the lie. Fair enough. Friction, the private flight club owned and operated by the Satellite and the Retinue, was a hotspot they all frequented to blow off steam. It'd been a little over a month since he'd last been, so sparring with Kaz actually sounded like a good time. Back to business then, Michael stated, though it was obvious it was going to take more time for him to come around as easily as his cousin had. Shooter got away. Casimir tossed Gannon between them and dusted off his hands. This guy was the getaway driver. How'd the getaway driver end up here alone? Michael asked. His cousin laughed. Darndest thing, the shooter ran right up to the driver's side of the car and yanked him out before speeding off on his own. Still, rabbit-eyed Gannon. That means he knows who the shooter is. Word of advice, Flick said to the bleeding man. Be honest. Who's the shooter? Michael twisted his hand so his palm was up and summoned smoky tendrils. The shadows writhed and twisted. If you don't respond within the next 30 seconds, I'll slip this beneath your skin and let it separate the layers from your flesh, one by one. Gannon recoiled. I heard there was a problem. Berga entered seemingly out of nowhere suddenly, coming over to them on silent steps. The whole school is talking about it. The others should be here shortly. There's no need, Michael told him. Contact them and tell them to meet at the bunker instead. We'll bring him there and see what you can get out of him. Berga grinned and Gannon made a panicked noise and twisted toward Flix. Are you seriously going to let them torture me? He cried. I'm Ineski's best friend. Friends don't want to fuck one another, Flix corrected. And I'm confident the second I explain to Ani that you tried to have me killed, he'll take my side. You've brainwashed him, Gannon accused. He would never... A slew of open fire shut him up instantly, bullets clipping into the dirt ground to send heaps of dust swirling into the air. They moved quickly, ducking behind two of the tables and flipping them to add a barrier. Flix and Berga ended up behind one, while Rabbit, Michael, and Kaz were behind the other. They left Gannon where he was, right in the middle of the danger. Sure enough, the shooting slowed, and they listened as a couple of people risked exiting the forest to retrieve him. Shepherds. Casimir peeked around his table and told them. Ineski? Berga rolled his eyes when Flix growled. He would never, Flix stated, catching Michael's eye. He wouldn't. Are we just going to let them take Gannon? Kaz asked. They won't get far. First, Michael motioned to Flix's multi-slate. Call your onus. Flix typed in the number quickly, popping out the earpiece to listen as it rang. And rang. And rang. Just as fear started gripping him, the other line finally connected. Hey, Firebug. A familiar yet distinctly not Ani's voice drawled. Been a long time. Sorry we can't catch up, but Ineski and I have to meet up with his brother. Where the fuck is Ani? Flix demanded. On his way out of town. He never should have been left in your care in the first place. Without waiting for permission, Flix snapped onto his feet and threw his arms out toward the group of shepherds currently pulling Gannon to what they imagined to be safety. He let loose as much electricity as he could, unalarmed by their gunfire. His power cut through the bullets with ease and had all four of the shepherds twitching on the ground in less time than it took to blink. Even in his anger, he left Gannon as the sole survivor, not wanting to hurt Ani by murdering his friend. So consumed by worry for his tiny terror, he hardly noticed when the idiot stumbled to his feet and took off. It didn't even occur to him to chase after, not caring about Gannon or anyone else at that moment. Flix ended the call, knowing it would be useless to bother trying to negotiate with the man on the other line. Instead, he turned to Berga, who was still kneeling. "Can I borrow Madden for a bit?" Chapter 25. "You're really not coming to lunch?" Rexton stalled in the doorway of the studio. "I've got a week's worth of work to catch up on," Oneski reminded, waving him off with clay-stained fingers. "Just bring me back something." His friend was hesitant to go, but Ani ignored him, hoping he'd eventually get the hint and leave him be. He wasn't lying. There really was a ton to do now that he'd lost 5 days, and his midterm project wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be for him to earn the grade he deserved. It was frustrating, but also, it was going to be fun complaining about it to Flix later. Maybe if he was particularly annoying, he could even convince Flix to make it up to him somehow, preferably in the bedroom, or the living room, or the shower. Hell, the two of them had yet to fuck in the library, and Ani thought that could be a lot of fun. Things were moving quickly, but at the same time, none of it felt like it was happening fast enough for him. He still felt nervous whenever he took too long of a pause, like maybe it was all too good to be true, and one day he'd blink and realize it was all just another elaborate fantasy. On the flip side of that same coin, there was Russ. Flix was giving Ani space to deal with the revelation about his brother, but he'd ask him more about it sooner or later. The problem was, he still didn't fully understand how he felt about that whole situation. Had he wasted the past 3 years trying to find answers for his brother? Yes. Had reading those letters made him realize how foolish and wasteful of his time that had been? Also yes. But more than that, those letters had reminded him of things he'd somehow pushed to the back of his mind after the funeral. Losing someone that suddenly was jarring. It struck a nerve. Ani wasn't the only person on the planet to forget about the bad memories and only recall the good after the supposed death of a loved one. Russ was gone, and he'd convinced himself their relationship had been stronger than it actually was. The reality of the matter was that they hadn't been very close at all. They tolerated each other on a good day and resented one another on the bad ones. And back then, there'd been more bad than good. Oneski shouldn't be surprised that Russ had chosen to leave him out of his plans to run from Haroon. Why would he have told him? They hardly spoke. Despite living in the same apartment for most of their lives, Ani had exchanged more pleasantries with Flix whenever he was visiting than he had with his own brother. That fact made him feel more foolish than anything. How could he have believed even for a second that Russ had spent his time working and saving, and for Ani's benefit? Yeah, right. If he hadn't been so distraught about his dead brother, and then later depressed and feeling rejected over Flix, he most likely would have pieced the truth together sooner. He'd yet to ask Flix directly, but there was no question now about where the money currently funding his time in the studio room came from. Even when he'd pretended to no longer care, Flix had taken care of him. Oneski straightened, twirling the sculpting knife in his hand as he inspected his progress. Yesterday, after packing up all his useful belongings, he'd come downstairs anticipating a stressful trip to Void Manor, only to end up at the mall instead. They'd spent the better part of 5 hours there, and at first Ani had insisted on checking out the shops he'd never be able to afford anything in. He'd figured it would irk Flix, or at the very least, that the Brummel member would call him on his bullshit, but he hadn't. If there was something Ani showed even a remote interest in, Flix insisted he either try it on or buy it outright. At one point, he'd made a joke about how his affection couldn't be bought. Flix had merely grinned at him, leaned in and whispered if he were trying to buy him, he'd be using something other than coin to do it. It hadn't been the best innuendo Ani had ever heard, but he chuckled anyway. They talked over dinner, really talked, about how they wanted things to be between them and about how Oneski desperately wanted to return to the university. Flix hadn't fought him on that as much as he'd feared, seemingly willing to give him his freedom now that they'd put on that show at Concealed. There were rules, for now, but they came from each of them. Flix's were that Ani didn't leave campus for any reason without telling him. He'd wait after class for the Brummel member to pick him up and wouldn't wander off with his friends or anyone else. Ani had agreed easily enough. It wasn't like there was anyone else he wanted to spend his time with anyway, not after years of pining over Flix, wishing they could be together. Aneski had given Flix a similar set of guidelines, however with a bit more leeway considering his position within the Mafia. Flix had to text him if he was going anywhere, unless it was Mafia work. And if he was going to be late picking him up, he had to let Ani know in advance and be fine with him finding a different ride home. It probably sounded like a bit much to some, but it was rather tame considering they'd both once held the other in chains locked in a room. These sets of rules gave them the peace of mind they both needed, and what's more, they trusted the other not to lie and break said rules. Progress. Ani's only regret was he wished he'd known sooner that all it'd take was begging Flix to fuck him harder in front of an audience. He would have made the suggestion that day at Vale instead of stabbing himself and risking his life. Lesson learned. The statue he'd been working on before when Flix had come here to retrieve him was tucked into the corner by the window, and the new piece he'd started this morning was already a third of the way completed. Was it kind of cliché of him to be working on a sculpture of his boyfriend? Yes. Was that going to stop him? Apparently not. He shook his head at himself and smoothed his thumb down the bridge of what was already identifiable as Flix's nose. Right now, he was operating off of memory, but he'd already decided he'd ask to take photos once they were home later. He didn't really need them to do this, but it was a good excuse for an impromptu photo shoot, and having a picture of the two of them together had always been something he dreamed of as a lovesick, idiotic teen. "You look so professional," a deep voice stated from within the doorway, breaking through Ani's concentration. "Bowser!" Aneski set his tool down on the table and went to greet him, pausing halfway there when he recalled he was covered in clay. "Hold on, let me wash this off. What are you doing back here? Are you visiting your aunt?" Bowser had been one of the very few friends of Russ's, other than Flix, who Ani had gotten along with. He hadn't treated him the same way Flix had, but he'd been nice to him, especially during and after the funeral. The only time the two of them had argued had been when Ani had insisted on joining the Shepherds, but Bowser hadn't been able to stop him since he'd gone straight to Haroon. After graduation a couple of years ago, he'd moved to the other side of the planet to start a job at Brightly & Son, and they'd mostly lost touch aside from a friendly email here and there during the holidays. "No, I came to see you actually," Bowser replied, stepping into the room. He crossed over to the sculpture, staring at it closely for a while. Ani washed his hands in the sink attached to the far wall, and then dried them. "Me?" He'd been so excited about the older guy's arrival that it hadn't occurred to him that maybe he was here because of the new information on Russ. Aneski hadn't been quiet about the letters or his discovery, so the rest of the Shepherds had heard the news as well. Knowing some of them kept in touch with Bowser, it wasn't too surprising that he'd learn about it and come. "You heard my brother isn't dead, huh?" He clicked his tongue and walked over to him. "Kind of shitty of him, right? Lying to us all like that." "Haroon was a scary guy," Bowser said, giving the sculpture one last look before turning away from it. "Not a very smart one, though. If he didn't have the backing of most of the gang, he would have been killed off years ago." "Did you go to his funeral?" Ani hadn't. Haroon had only died recently, and he hadn't bothered attending, even if there'd been the slight chance it would piss off other Shepherd members. When he'd been alive, Aneski had kept his head down and avoided being in the same room with him as often as possible, so he sure as shit wasn't going to waste any time with Haroon's dead corpse. "I heard there weren't many people in attendance." "That's not at all that surprising," Bowser replied with a snort. "I didn't go, though, no. If I had, I would have popped by to see you." "Like you're doing now?" Aneski checked his multi-slate, seeing that there was technically still time for lunch at the cafeteria. He couldn't leave campus. He so wasn't going to break his word on the very first day of his and Flix's agreement, but it would be rude to make Bowser stand here watching him work. "Want to grab a bite at the cafe? Rexton should be there." "Actually, I've been craving the greasy burgers from that dive bar on Route 33, Hannah's. How about we go there?" I can't really take that much time away from this project." He pointed to the sculpture. "I'm already pretty far behind and worried I won't finish by the deadline. It's worth 30% of my grade, so kind of important." "Not if you transfer." Bowser looked incredibly serious when he spoke, which had Aneski's hackles instantly rising. "Since I don't have any intentions of doing that," he let his sentence drag on, ending with an awkward laugh. "There are better schools where I live," Bowser said. You'll be able to transfer all of your credits as well. Though, seeing your skill level, it seems unnecessary to stick with school. How about we just rent out a gallery space and you... What is going on here? Ani stopped him. Why did you actually come? Because if it was to try and convince me to leave with you, that's not happening. Is this because of Russ? You heard... I found out 6 months ago, Bowser confessed, and there was a layer of guilt there at least. I wanted to tell you, but he begged me not to and threatened to go no contact with me as well. He let me know about the letters. Apparently, he thought you were angry and ignoring him. When we heard that you only recently received them, Aneski inhaled deeply, trying to wrap his head around this new information, unsure at first how he felt about it. It pissed him off and kind of hurt that Bowser had known for such a long time and kept hush-hush about it, no matter the reason. But more than that, all of the things he wasn't saying had Ani's anxiety and suspicions growing. You're the blonde Ganon saw dropping off the letters, aren't you? It made sense since it most definitely wasn't Flicks like Ganon had wrongly believed. If he'd known it was Bowser, there was no way Ani's friend would have kept them, having only done so out of spite against the Brummel member. Back then I didn't know what they really were, Bowser tried to explain. I mean it. I thought they were sent posthumous. He'd sent me one as well, and in it he pretended to have written it before the accident, requesting that I don't seek revenge and just let it go if anything ever happened to him. Why didn't you ever ask me about them then? They'd spent the rest of that year in the Shepherds together, seeing each other fairly often. He'd had plenty of opportunity. I assumed they were private and didn't want to pry. You were already so upset. Bowser turned his head back to the statue with a scowl. He didn't help any. Don't you remember how shitty he made you feel? How could you be with someone like that, Aneski? My relationship isn't up for discussion, he stated. Actually, right now, neither is anything else. I'd like for you to go. Something was wrong here, and he needed to focus on getting Bowser to leave him alone long enough for him to send a message to Rexton. If he had backup, there was a better chance whatever Bowser was planning, he'd give it up and try again later. By then, Ani could call Flicks. The cafeteria was only a 5-minute sprint away, much closer than Vale University. All he had to do was keep himself safe until he could. Bowser reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a blaster, giving him an apologetic look when Aneski sucked in a sharp breath as the weapon was aimed directly at him. I really didn't want to do this, Bowser said. But we're wasting time. The Shepherds are keeping Flicks distracted. If they get lucky, maybe they can even take him out. But if they don't, he'll figure out what's really going on. What's really going on? You're coming with me, he announced. Your brother wants to see you. And if I say no, you'll shoot me? Aneski didn't believe him, but that must be obvious. I'm not the only one in the building with a gun, Bowser told him. It wasn't a stretch to assume that Rex would be in the cafe since it's lunchtime. Someone's watching him as we speak. If I don't give them a text telling them I've got you in the car and we're heading out, they'll shoot him. What the fuck? Ani couldn't let his best friend get dragged into this. There was still another 20 minutes left before lunch ended. If Rexton came back and saw he was gone, he tried to contact him. When he couldn't get through, maybe he'd be smart enough to reach out to Flicks. Or he'd just assumed the Brummel had shown up impromptu and the two of them had left together early. Shit. Hand over your multi-slate. Slowly, Bowser ordered. Don't make this harder than it already is, Aneski. I'm going to bash your face in, he promised as he undid the strap holding the device in place and chucked it at him. Bowser cursed but kept the blaster aimed his way without fail, glaring after he'd caught the multi-slate. Don't be childish. You're kidnapping me, he pointed out. Like hell am I going to make this easy for you? Why? Don't you want to see Russ? No. Bowser frowned. You sound like you mean it. I do. He had absolutely no interest in ever seeing his brother again. I knew the second I read those letters that he was dead to me, whether his body was rotted away or not. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a brother. That isn't going to change, no matter where you take me or what you do. This is a waste of both of our time. He just wants to talk to you, Aneski. That's all. If that were true, neither of you would be going to these types of lengths, Ani said. Just, Bowser sighed, start walking. I parked in the south lot. Let's go. Not seeing any other way out of it, Ani decided to comply. For now. Chapter 26. Ani ended up in the back seat of a rental car, his wrists tied together with rope that chafed as he struggled against them. It was a bold move to leave him in the back like that instead of tying him up front, a clear indicator that Bowser underestimated him. As tempting as it was to throw himself at the driver and force them off the road, Ani kept his cool, letting things play out in the hopes he could find a better opening. Preferably a means out of this that wouldn't send Flix into another one of his mad tizzies and result in a Nesky back in that collar. He could hear it now. Flix's scolding if he did go with plan A and crash the car. He'd yell at him for being reckless for sure. What are you grinning about? Bowser glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but then quickly back at the road. The guy was even going the exact speed limit. Aneski leaned back against the leather, fingers still trying to find a way to undo his binding, and chuckled. Just thinking about how my boyfriend is going to react once he figures out I'm missing. By the time he does, he changed lanes. We'll be long gone. Don't count on it. This is for your own good, Aneski. What were you thinking dating a Brummel member? And Flix, of all people? He's got one of the most dangerous jobs, but he's also no better than an errand boy. It's not the shepherds, Bowser, Ani drawled. He's not going from house to house beating people down for owed money. Flix attended shady business deals and was the first on the scene if something happened to one of their own. The whole organization would fall apart without him. He could hardly be referred to as an errand boy. No, I guess you're right. He hesitated, clearly wanting to say something, but unsure if he could get away with whatever it was, which piqued Ani's curiosity. Just spit it out, Aneski said, trying for a casual air he wasn't feeling. That's what Flix would do in this situation, make his captor believe he felt the exact opposite of what he actually was, get them to let their guard down. His relationship with Bowser, having always been a good one, should work in his favor. All he had to do was play it right. Tell me. Brummel make a lot of money, he began, tentatively at first. Even if they didn't, the Fulmini are generational wealth. It was starting to make more sense. Aneski waited for the pang of disappointment to hit him, the ache of knowing that his brother wasn't interested in seeing him at all, but it never came. He must have been telling the truth earlier when he'd said he was over having any sort of relationship with Russ. As far as he was concerned, his brother really was dead. That's what this is? Really? Money? He shook his head. I get it coming from Russ, but what about you? Don't you work for a fancy company? I was laid off a few months ago, Bowser confessed. The job market hasn't been kind, and I can't find any work that'll pay enough to help with my debts. Debts? I went a little overboard when I moved away, got used to luxury brands and stuff. Started pretending you were something other than the wrong side of the track trash from Valio, Aneski hummed, laughing when Bowser glared. It was a joke, relax. We're the same kind of people, remember? Insulting you is only insulting myself. Besides, it's commendable you were able to make something of yourself at all, even if it didn't last. Thanks. Why didn't you just ask me, though? If this really was just about money, I could have helped you out, and we could have skipped all of this. It's not just my debts, Bowser admitted. That's what Ani had been afraid of. How much does Russ owe? Bowser licked his lips. A lot. Ani sighed. I don't think you should be giving me advice about who I'm with when you're still spending this much energy on my brother. His brow furrowed. I mean, look, it took a lot for me to forgive him for faking his death. But when he found me, even after all that time had passed, there was still a spark. I tried to stay mad, I did. But in the end, I couldn't. I love him too damn much, flaws and all. And he swore this would be it. All of those debts, he collected them before we met. Once he's cleared his slate, we're going to start fresh, just the two of us. Well, The two of us and you, of course. Are the two of you together? He felt kind of dumb for not considering that possibility and couldn't hold back the shock, but Bowser seemed just as surprised as he was. You didn't know? I thought for sure you did. What did you think was going on that time you accidentally walked in on us? Walked? Holy shit. No. Wait, what? You came home one day and saw the two of us having sex in Russ's room, Bowser said. That's not exactly something forgettable. That was you? Who did you think it was? Bowser's eyes widened a second later when he answered his own question. You thought Russ was sleeping with Flix? No way. The two of them were only ever just friends. Now that he was thinking about it, Ani had never gotten Flix to confess to having any sort of romantic relationship with his brother. The two of them hadn't even spoken of it aside from when he'd been interrogating him at the hideaway. He'd assumed Flix was deflecting, but what if what Bowser was saying now was true? That meant he really hadn't ever been with Russ. How had Ani gotten it so wrong? He'd been obsessed with Flix, with him constantly on his mind, but had it really been to the extent that his eyes would play tricks on him like that? Aside from the blonde hair, Bowser and the Brummel member didn't look anything alike, though he'd only seen him from behind, and briefly, since he'd immediately bolted. Ganon had mistaken Bowser for Flix when he dropped off the letters, so clearly they had more in common appearance-wise than Ani consciously thought. He supposed they were also roughly the same height, and had a similar shoulder width. Since both Ani and Ganon had been thinking about Flix, he'd been the one they'd assumed they'd seen. We've been on and off since we were 17, Bowser continued, a bit more solemnly. Things would get complicated and one of us would break it off, only to get back together eventually. We tried to keep it on the down low once we got older because our friends got sick of our on-again, off-again bullshit. Can't blame them. I got sick of it too. That's why I broke up with him the week before his death, and got back with him the second he came crawling. With a fuck ton of debt from the sounds of it. You know he's just using you, right? He's different, Bowser insisted. He'll change. You said you've only been out of work a few months, he pointed out. Didn't you have any savings? Bowser didn't respond, which was answer enough. You gave it to him, didn't you? It was rhetorical because, obviously, he had. You're literally helping him kidnap me right now so you can ransom me against the Brummel member, Bowser. Think this through. You're the one who warned me against dating him earlier. You're not this dense. What do you think is going to happen to you when Flix finds out? And you're making it sound like you believe there's any chance I'll be able to leave with you after. Even if I wanted to, which, for the record, I do not. If you're exchanging me for money, you sort of actually have to follow through on the exchange part of the deal. Bowser and Flix had never gotten along in the past either. Flix didn't have the same warm memories that Ani did. There was nothing to stop him from zapping the guy on the spot and turning him into barbecue. Ani didn't want to see his brother, but Bowser wasn't Russ. You were there for me when I needed someone, he said. Even when my brother wasn't. Even when my brother was the cause of my pain. Please, Bowser. I don't want to see you get hurt. Haven't we all suffered enough because of Russ? I won't get hurt. He didn't sound very convinced himself, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as he brought them onto the highway that would lead out of the city. Because you'll help us, won't you? All you have to do is play along, get Flix to give us the money, and then the three of us, I'm not going anywhere with you. Fine. Russ and I then, we'll get out of here. That time there was a pang in his chest. He'd known Russ wasn't interested in him, but hearing those words from Bowser, knowing that he'd be fine tossing Ani to the side as well, kind of stung. So much for all that talk about transferring schools. Not to mention how Bowser planned on Ani paying for said transfer if the dude was that broke. Even if the older guy was stupid enough to believe Russ would share, Ani knew better. The second his brother got his hands on that coin, he was out of here. And he'd most likely be leaving Bowser behind. He's using you, unless you tried to get him to see reason. Why'd he wait so long to find you if he wasn't? That's all this is. Don't fall for it. Trust me. My brother is scum. You really think Flix is any better? Bowser snorted. You're forgetting that I have contact with the shepherds. Many of them are still loyal to me even though I moved away. It was easy to get them to follow my orders, especially since none of them like the fact that you're playing Flix's boy toy. If either of us are at risk of getting left, it's you, Aneski. No, he disagreed. I'm his onus. That means something. I don't know how you convinced him to give you that title, but if he gave a damn about you, he wouldn't have kept you locked up for the past week. If Ani had been curious if Bowser had planted any spies in the shepherds, that would have answered his question. Clearly, there was no one actually doing any kind of research into things. He was merely going off of hearsay within the gang, which would have been whatever they'd picked up on from Rex and the others. Things like Ani being kept with Flix all this time, and how the two of them were together, but nothing more. Nothing nuanced. I tried to warn Russ that Flix might not even care if you disappeared, but he insists he will. He wasn't here, though. He didn't see the way Flix treated you after the funeral, Bowser added. He treated me like that because he thought he was doing me and Russ a favor, keeping me safe. Sure, it's the truth. Whatever you say, Aneski. There were two options. The first was they were both delusional, and had fallen for assholes who tricked them into believing they meant more to them than they actually did. The other was that Ani was right, and Bowser was wrong. Want to make a bet? He suggested, feeling kind of petty and still pissed that any of this was happening at all. If Flix betrays me, gives me up and refuses to pay you guys a single coin, I'll give you access to my savings. You can take it and do whatever you want with it. But if Russ betrays you, it had to be something good, something worth it. You have to help me escape. If he hadn't managed that on his own already. Always smart to have an extra out just in case. Do you agree? Fine. Bowser surprised him again by saying without even thinking about it first. I'm confident I know better than you do about my own relationship. Ani didn't point out how hypocritical that statement was, but whatever. I want a list of all the shepherds who helped you, Ani said. He'd make sure they were kicked out so something like this could never happen again. Didn't matter if he was leaving. Whoever was going to take his place needed to know they could trust the members. Doesn't really make a difference now, Bowser told him flippantly. They're all dead. What do you mean? Your boyfriend was able to call earlier, he reminded. That's got to mean he killed them. Flix had called right after Bowser had tied Ani and shoved him into the car. He'd been standing out of it when he'd taken the call on Aneski's multi-slate, only telling him who the caller was after he'd ended it and gotten in himself. Screaming for help in the background wasn't Ani's style, though, so it didn't really make all that much of a difference that he'd missed the opportunity to give it a try. So there isn't a single member with Russ right now? Aneski let out a low whistle. That's a bold choice. Wouldn't have gone that way myself, but okay. You just left one of your followers on Rex and sent the rest to Vale? It's not like Flix will be able to find us. No? I tossed your multi-slate in the parking lot, Bowser reminded. That's true. The guy really should have done a body search, though. The ring hanging around Ani's neck was still tucked beneath his shirt, and he could feel it warm against his skin. He'd put it there to avoid getting any clay on it, especially since it was brand new. Just remember our bet, okay? Bowser laughed and opened his mouth to reply, but the sound of hoverbike engines revving cut off whatever he'd been about to say. He frowned and glanced into the side mirror, even as Ani twisted in the seat to look behind them to see as well. The bikes came on them fast, 3 in all. They sped through the other cars in the lane, darting between them with ease. All the riders had on black leathers and helmets, shielding their identities, but it didn't take long to figure out they were after Bowser's car when one sped up while the other two moved to flank Bowser's vehicle. Almost as soon as the lone hoverbike made its way in front of them, the rider came to an abrupt stop. Bowser swore and slammed on the brakes, practically sending Ani careening between the front seats before falling back. The older guy reached for the dashboard, where he'd stashed the blaster as soon as he'd gotten into the car earlier, but he was too slow. The hoverbike rider who'd cut them off swung a leg over the bike and removed his helmet, exposing himself to their view. At the same time, his 2 accomplices stopped at either side of the front of the car, blasters out and aimed at Bowser. "Is that Madden Odell?" Bowser asked once they got a good look at the rider in front. "What the hell is he doing here?" "Good question." "No clue," Ani admitted. The sound of another bike coming up on them had him turning a second time. It circled around the stopped car, twisting and parking directly next to Madden, facing the wrong direction on the road. Flix yanked off his helmet and tossed it to the ground, motioning to Madden to hand over the blaster. The two of them spoke, but Ani couldn't make out any of the words, could only catch that whatever they were saying, it wasn't an argument, and Madden was more than willing to go along with whatever Flix said. Aneski had known the Brummel had ties to the retinue, but he hadn't imagined they'd come together like this in a pinch, especially not to help someone as unimportant as him. Yet, here they were. Madden was the right-hand man to the Imperial Prince, Kalevra Dr. He went to school at the academy and was known for running the illegal street races at the docks. The riders who'd come with him still had their helmets on since they were focused on keeping their weapons steady, but they were either other retinue members or some of Madden's racers. Considering their skill level just now, Ani's money was on the latter. "Told you he'd come," Aneski couldn't help but say the moment Flix started toward them. The smart thing to do would be to wait, but he was impatient. Flinging himself at the door, Ani turned and used his bond hands to pull on the handle, gasping when it opened and he spilled out onto the pavement. Flix was next to him in a flash, lifting him onto his feet with an annoyed glare. "Why would you do that? Couldn't you have waited 2 seconds for me?" Ani flung himself at the Brummel member, sealing their mouths together, effectively shutting him up before he could scold him further and ruin the moment. Chapter 27. The second Flix had Ani standing next to him, safe and unharmed. A weight was lifted off his chest he hadn't noticed was there. He undid the ropes binding his wrists, a spark of fury whipping through him when he saw Ani's skin there was red and raw. "I should kill him," he mumbled to himself, but Aneski heard, turning in his hole to face him. Ani settled back against the closed car door while Madden's guy yanked Bowser out of the driver's side at gunpoint. He didn't so much as flinch or glance his way as the older man was practically dragged to the head of the vehicle, giving the two of them a modicum of privacy, however brief. "He's working for my brother," Ani said. "Russ has him convinced it's love, and they're going to run off together." He snorted and rubbed at his right wrist with a wince he didn't seem to notice he made. "Why didn't you tell me the two of you never hooked up?" "Who?" Flix looked to Bowser, who was being shoved to his knees before a grinning Madden. "Him?" "No, you and Russ." "Why would I have slept with Russ?" Thinking back on it, he vaguely recalled something from when he'd been chained to the wall last month. "You were serious about that dating comment?" "Not a chance in hell." "Is this really the time for this conversation?" Madden called out to them, pulling his leather gloves off and dusting them on his pants with a hard slap. "I've got places to be, Firebug." Yeah, Flix waved him off, then motioned with his chin in that direction. "Let's finish this talk later, okay?" The other two riders that had come with Madden weren't retinue or satellite, and Flix gave them a thankful nod of his head as he approached. Since he spent a decent time at the docks, he was familiar with them, though he wouldn't say they were close. Surely not close enough to risk their lives for him. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Flix said to Madden, holding up a hand for a quick fist bump. "And for bringing backup." It sounded important. Madden shrugged. "Besides, what are friends for?" He took a single step closer, voice lowering. "You'll uphold your end of the deal though, right?" He nodded in agreement and bent down to remove Bowser's multi-slate from his wrist, being a little rougher about it than absolutely necessary. "How'd you manage to locate them so fast?" Madden asked, and Flix held up his left hand to show the white gold ring on his middle finger. "No shit. Tracking devices." Ani pulled his out from where it was hidden on a chain beneath his shirt. Since he was constantly working with his hands and getting them dirty, they'd agreed he'd be better off wearing his around his neck. "Great idea, don't you think?" "Let me guess," Madden laughed. "You came up with it?" "My onus is many things." Flix ruffled Ani's hair, grinning when that had the younger guy glaring. "But modest isn't one of them. He insisted we both get them for peace of mind." "Admittedly, I didn't count on us needing them this soon," Ani added. It was endearing when Ineski stopped them in front of the store at the mall yesterday and asked for them. They'd picked out a set of rings they both liked, and Flix had joked it was like they were getting married. The tracking devices hidden in them were linked to each of their multi-slates, so they could always find the other. They'd gotten them since trust was still such an issue, and old wounds took time to heal. More a statement than anything they'd actually thought they'd ever need. But it definitely helped in this scenario. We really have to lay off getting kidnapped for a bit, Flix joked. It's starting to get tedious. Madden sent Flix a questioning look, but he merely shrugged and lifted Bowser's multi-slate. The time he spent with Ani at the hideaway was still a secret, and it was going to remain one if he had anything to say about it. Without further delay, Flix dialed the last number called, waiting for the other line to accept, leaving the device on speaker so everyone could listen as it rang. "Where are you?" Russ's voice came through in less than a minute. "Long time no see," Flix drawled. There was a pause, and then a low chuckle. "Guess the plan didn't work out." "Nope." "And Ineski? Shouldn't you be asking about your boyfriend?" He quirked a brow at Bowser, who was gritting his teeth, but silent. Kind of surprising that he wasn't trying to alert Russ to his presence. Maybe he was just as curious as Flix was whether or not this thing between them was real. "Him?" Russ grunted. "We're friends, that's all." "That's not what he said." "We sleep together for fun sometimes," he insisted. That's really all. There was a chance Russ was downplaying their relationship in an attempt to keep Flix from harming Bowser, but the relaxed way he was speaking didn't sound like a lie. Lying wasn't really Russ's strong suit either. That's why he'd skipped town so quickly after discovering whatever it was he'd found out about Haroon. He'd known no matter what he said, Haroon wouldn't trust him not to spill his secrets eventually. "So you wouldn't mind if I cut his ears off then?" Flix reached into his pocket and pulled out a switchblade, making sure the click of the weapon springing free could be heard through the device. "Not especially," Russ said. "Though I do have to ask, why the ears?" He heard Ani tell him he wasn't interested in seeing you, yet he took him anyway. Flix pointed the tip of the blade at Bowser's hands, which were clasped in his lap. "Next, I'll slit his wrists. He tied my tiny terror up and left marks all over him. That sort of thing won't be tolerated." "Tiny Terror," Russ chuckled again. "Been a long time since I heard that nickname." "Why do you call him that anyway? I never knew." He'd never bothered trying to find out in the past, he meant, because back then, if it had to do with Ineski, Russ didn't care. The only reason he kept his brother in the apartment with him was that both of their names had been added to the property title when Flix had purchased it for them a couple of years after their father's death. Even then, before he'd met Ani, Flix had known the type of person Russ was. He should have done something more, something sooner, to help protect his onus, but at the time, Flix had genuinely believed he was doing him a favor by keeping his distance. "He was always moving through your house like a ghost," Flix informed him. "Mostly to avoid you." "Wow, Big Brother Award of the Year is going to Russ, is it?" Madden snorted. "Who's that?" Russ still didn't sound all that bent out of shape about things not having gone his way. There was only so far not caring could go, though. There had to be something else up his sleeve. Russ might not give a shit about Ineski or Bowser, but he wasn't the type to be calm after losing. "Royal Madden Odell," Madden replied. "I helped catch your boyfriend. Sorry. Fuck, buddy." Bowser hung his head at that, but didn't bother correcting him. Ineski crouched at his side and whispered, "Finally seeing what my brother is really like?" "Shut up," he said, with little conviction in his tone. "He's just trying not to implicate me." "Don't be a moron," Ani scowled. "If he didn't want to get you involved, he wouldn't have in the first place. The whole reason you're here is because of him. I know this is hard. It took me a while to admit that my brother is selfish too, but that's the truth." Flix hated seeing Ineski put on such a strong front. No matter Russ's reasoning, at the end of the day, he'd provided for Ani after their father's death, even if most of the resources had come from Flix's money those last few years. He wondered how much of this was his fault. Flix had set the precedent, had been the one to put the idea in Russ's head that he could use him for coin whenever he'd pleased. "I should have taken Ani from the start," he said out loud. "Sure, He'd been a kid and at the time hadn't owned the house he currently lived in, but he'd had an apartment himself and more money than he could have hoped to spend even at that age. The second he realized he wanted Ani, he should have taken him, saved them all the trouble. "He's my little brother," Russ stated, finally some of that irritation coming through. "Don't be such a sore loser." "I haven't lost anything yet," he disagreed. "The only way that happens is if you make off with what's mine." "Bowser is listening," Flix pointed out. "He heard everything you said about him just now. Ani already figured out that you're trash, and I'm not giving you a cent. It's over, Russ. Your best bet is turning tail and getting out of the country. I'll let you crawl back to whatever hovel you've been living in." He met Ani's gaze. "For your brother's sake." Aneski might not like Russ, but there was a difference between hating a person and wanting them dead. If it were up to Flix, he'd kill him just to ensure nothing like this would ever happen again. But Ani was softer-hearted than he was, even if he liked to pretend otherwise. He'd never be okay with Flix murdering his brother, not for something like this. A lie and an attempted kidnapping/ransom wouldn't be enough to justify taking his life in Ani's mind. It irked him and went against all his better instincts, but Flix could let Russ walk to keep Aneski's conscience clear. Still, that didn't mean he could let him go completely scot-free. "Tell you what," Flix said to Russ. "I'll trade you. You were planning on ransoming my boyfriend, right? Tables have turned. I'll give you Bowser back for 200 coin." That was pennies, and he purposely chose a low number, winking at Bowser when he gasped and stared up at him. "Surely even you can scrape together that much." "I'm not paying you shit," Russ replied. "No? Even if I promise to ditch the ear-cutting plan? I'll give him to you unharmed. How about this? 100 coin, final offer. I'm not paying you, Flix. You don't need the money anyway." "He doesn't have it," Bowser finally spoke up. "Not even 100 coin?" Flix let out a whistle. "All right, if that's true, then I'll take pity on you. Trade yourself. You hand yourself over and I'll let Bowser go. Technically, this is your mess. You should be the one to pay for it, and if you don't have money, I have other ways you can pay off your debts. If you don't show yourself," he brought the tip of the blade to Bowser's ear, nicking the side of the lobe so he'd make a startled sound and help get the point across. "I'll start cutting." It was almost sad to see the pathetic, hopeful look pass over Bowser's face as they waited for a response. He wasn't a bad guy, never had been. His only fault really was in getting involved with people like Haroon and Russ. They dragged him through the muck, and if Flix's guess was correct, the latter was about to hang him out to dry. "I wouldn't trade myself to you for anyone," Russ said. "Not even if it was Aneski you were threatening." "I would never," Flix reminded. "Yeah, that's the only good thing about all of this. Your feelings for my brother mean you're the one who has something to lose. Maybe I won't get any coin out of this, but like hell am I leaving empty-handed. You always thought you were so much better than me, Flix. But you know what? If I can't have them, neither can you. I'd rather they die than you be happy knowing you won." "What?" Flix swore when the sound of gunfire echoed through the area a second before he felt the sharp burn of a bullet tear through the side of his right thigh. He almost went down, but Ani grabbed onto him, dragging him toward the hood of the car. They both dropped behind it, taking cover, while the others ran off to do the same. Madden ended up on Aneski's other side, clutching his right arm. "Just grazed me," he reassured, pulling his blaster up before shooting over the top of the vehicle in the direction the shots had come from. Single shooter coming from the tree line. There was a dense forest on the right side of the road they were parked on, and though the situation was similar to the one Flix had just come from at Vale, he stupidly hadn't considered sending anyone to check the surrounding area. As far as he'd been concerned, Bowser had been on his way to wherever Russ was located, which meant he hadn't been here. He also hadn't figured Russ would risk himself by single-handedly trying to kill them. "Should we get him?" Jet, one of the riders who'd come with Madden, settled in front of them and motioned around the car. Shit. Flix had forgotten about Bowser. He planted a palm on the asphalt and leaned an inch or so forward so he could see, swearing again when he saw the man curled in on himself on the ground, shaking. "He's been hit," Jet added. "I could get him." Don't risk yourself, Madden replied before Flix could come to a decision. He sent another round of fire into the forest, bullets zipping through the air to slam into the thin trunks of the narrow birch trees. Got eyes on the target? The second rider who'd come with him, Chaya, was at the bottom of the car. I see movement. Going in. He sprinted toward the forest, firing as he went. Bad time to ask how you've been? Jet tried to lighten the mood by asking Ani. Flix's eyes narrowed. You two know each other? I go to guest, Jet said. Of course you do. Both Madden and Chaya went to the academy, but Flix hadn't known where Jet attended. Haven't seen you on campus lately, Jet continued. I've been tied up. Ani smirked Flix's way and then turned to glance through the car windows. Seems like it's calmed down over there. Should we go check it out? Yeah. Flix stood and offered him a hand. Then he pointed to Bowser and instructed Jet. Check on him. They circled the car and headed up the slight incline leading into the forest, but they didn't get far before a body burst through the trees, practically crashing into them. Flix yanked Ani out of the way just in time, but almost lost his footing in the process. Because of that, it took him longer than it should have to raise his gun and aim, though once he had, he hesitated. It was obvious even from behind it was Russ running away. Madden and Chaya appeared a second later, weapons still drawn. When they saw Flix standing there, not doing anything, they both stopped next to him and Ani. How do you want us to proceed? Chaya asked first. He's getting away. I shot him in the side, Madden said, but he was slippery. If we don't handle him today, he'll come back and cause trouble down the line, Chaya guessed. He's the type. I know that, Flix snapped, hands still holding his blaster aloft. Blood seeped down the wound in his leg, and it hurt just to stand there. On top of that, Chaya wasn't wrong. Clearly, Russ was just out to get them, but he's Ani's older brother. Screw that. Ineski snatched the gun from Flix's hand and lowered the barrel, letting off a single shot that landed in the back of Russ's thigh. It wasn't a killing blow by any means, but he seemed wholly satisfied with himself when he handed the weapon back. A thigh for a thigh, right? Are you making jokes right now? Madden nodded his head in approval. Your onus is a badass, Firebug. Russ fell to the ground on his hands and screamed, but quickly forced himself back up. He turned and shot at them, seemingly realizing they weren't just going to let him off the hook, and they all scattered to avoid getting hit. Before they could come up with a real plan, however, a car engine revved, and Flix looked over just in time to see it zoom forward at full speed. Jet was on his ass on the ground, on the other side of it, staring wide-eyed as it sped off, heading straight for Russ. At first, Flix thought Bowser was trying to save him, but when the car didn't slow, it became apparent that's not at all what he intended. Flix might have figured Russ's actions didn't warrant a death sentence, but apparently, Bowser didn't agree. Knowing it was too late to prevent the collision from happening, Flix did the only thing he could think of, twisting himself in front of Ani. He covered his eyes with a hand and held them still, both of them flinching when, a moment later, tires squealed, followed by a crash and a heavy thud. Chapter 28. Ani felt numb as he sat on the couch in Flix's living room, only partially listening to what was being said around him. They'd come straight here after Russ's accident, and he'd gone straight to the couch. No one had tried getting him to engage in any sort of conversation as of yet, giving him the space he needed to sort through his thoughts. If only it was that simple. He knew what he should be feeling. Despite everything, at the end of the day, Russ was his brother. A decent person would be grieving, or, at the very least, feeling a modicum of sadness right now. But he just felt empty. Maybe it was because he'd already been through all of this before. He wasn't sure. 3 years ago, when he thought Russ had died, he'd been upset about the loss. They hadn't been close, but he'd convinced himself otherwise, creating a whole fake perspective about their life together and what it'd been like. Only focusing on the good in his grief, he'd allowed himself to forget all about the bad. But things were different this time. Russ had known full well that Ani thought he and Flix were together. He'd made comments about it before, which had led him to believe it was the truth. He'd also lied and made it out to seem like he was the one providing for Ani all those years, when in fact it'd been the Brummel member all along. "How's Bowser?" Flix's voice caught his attention, but only mildly, and Ani listened as he spoke with Jet, who'd come with them to the house. Madden had remained behind to deal with the ambulance and the officers, as well as to wait for Berga and Casimir. The three of them would take care of the situation and ensure that the rest of their names were left off of any reports made. Bowser wouldn't be so lucky. "You were on the damn highway," Michael, who'd arrived and had been waiting outside when they'd gotten there, frustratedly said. "Plenty of people saw him run straight into Russ. There are too many witnesses to cover this story up." "He's not one of us," Flix replied, "and no one was holding a gun to his head when he chose to get into that hovercar." "What I meant was, how are his injuries?" "Chaya says he's in surgery now," Jet answered. "The doctors mentioned he'd lost a lot of blood, and there was severe damage to a couple of organs, but they'll try their best to save him." "Thanks for getting involved," Flix said. "Sorry about all of this." "It's no problem," he insisted. Madden called in a favor. Aneski stopped listening, their chatter fading into the background as he propped his elbows on his knees and rubbed his palms together. His life had been one violent event after the other as of late, and it felt like just when he thought he'd finally be able to catch his breath, something else happened. Never in a million years would he have guessed that Bowser was involved with his brother the way he was. But more than that, Bowser had always come off like a level-headed person to Ani, not the type that was easily manipulated. Yet somehow, he'd fallen for Russ's lies even when they'd been so obviously an illusion. He was probably feeling pretty stupid right now. Or he would once he woke up. If he woke up. Russ had landed 2 shots on Bowser from what Ani could tell before Flix had shoved him onto the back of the bike he'd ridden there and taken off. Bowser had been bleeding from the side and from just below his right shoulder. His brother had opened fire with little care who he hit, and even after, when he had to have seen Bowser fall, he'd kept it up. Even if he hadn't felt romantic feelings toward Bowser, they'd been friends for years. Ani couldn't imagine doing anything like that to Rexton. "Ganon is being held at the bunker," Michael said then. "We can keep him there as long as you need." "I'll figure it out," Flix sighed. "Thanks." Fortunately, there was no one else on the quad when the rest of the shepherds attacked. Other students heard the commotion, but no one saw anything, and no innocent bystanders were harmed. "You think I should let him go?" "I think you should allow Berga to use him as a test subject," Michael corrected. "But it isn't my call, and I understand it's a bit more complicated for you." Ani felt their stares settle on him, but didn't lift his head. "We'll figure it out," Flix reiterated. "Speaking of," Michael took a step closer to the couch, but when Ani continued ignoring them, stopped. "As far as the shepherds are concerned, it looks like most of the bad eggs were involved in this half-assed plan. Their numbers kept dwindling, that was for sure. Aneski could see why the Brummel hadn't bothered with them. They were taking themselves off the board faster than it was necessary for Michael or anyone else to bother stepping in. "It's been confirmed that since taking over, things have been cleaned up," Michael continued. "With that being the case, let your Onus continue to run them." "You want him to remain the leader of the shepherds?" Flix sounded confused. "Better to have someone we trust doing it than risk another potential Haroon taking control. They're doing a lot of good for the community, loaning out cash for smaller businesses that otherwise would have gone under. If we mess with that, it'll look bad on the Brummel. We've always ruled with a mutual combination of fear and respect. We can't operate without both. Besides, your Onus earned his position. Who are we to swoop in and take it from him?" Did Ani even want to keep running the shepherds? He'd been ready to give them up and move on with his life. But Michael had a point. People were relying on them at the moment, and with Ganon out of the picture now as well, there weren't many members left that Ani could count on. He lifted a hand to his temples, a pressure starting to grow there. This was all too much to consider at once. His brother had only just died, and Russ was dead. For real this time. And Bowser had killed him. Aneski dropped back onto the couch, eyes turning up to the ceiling, tracing the crisscrossing high beams. This morning, his biggest worry had been whether or not he'd be able to catch up on his midterms in time. Now he had the shepherds, his brother's death, and what to do with Bowser and Ganon to deal with. Hey. Suddenly, Flix was kneeling in front of him, resting his hands over Ani's thighs. You good? Don't crouch like that with your injury. He pulled him up and made him sit next to him, immediately checking the tie around Flix's thigh. You were just shot. What are you doing putting pressure on the wound like that? It's fine, Flix reassured him. Michael took a look at it and I'm all cleaned up. The bullet cut through the side of my leg, that's all. It looked like I'd been shot through? Nope. He brushed a few tendrils of Ani's red hair off of his forehead. I'm fine, Tiny Terror. How about you? He let out a shaky breath. I don't know. That's fair. You're so calm. Being shot at sort of comes with Brummel territory. This isn't the first time a shepherd has pulled a gun on me either. It'll be the last, Ani promised darkly, hating just thinking about it. Did you hear what Michael said? Yeah, but I don't want to talk about it right now. All right. Ani cocked his head. That's it? We can talk about whatever you're comfortable talking about. I'm in no rush. He leaned onto his side, resting his head against the back of the couch. I'm not going anywhere. After a moment, Ani mirrored his position so they were facing one another. Where's Michael and Jet? They left. Without saying goodbye? They said goodbye. Oh, he hadn't noticed. Obviously. Would you like to take a bath? Flick suggested. You can wait here and I can draw one for you. Ani frowned. You can't get your injury wet. I don't care how good of a job Michael did patching you up. I won't, he smiled. I'll sit on the side. He couldn't help but pout. Are you trying to baby me? Aren't I always coddling you? Flick said. This doesn't have to be anything different than what it usually is. But it is, though. He closed his eyes and tried again to sort through how he was feeling, but it was like staring at an empty field, filled with nothing but fog. You don't have to comfort me. I'm pretty sure I'm okay with everything that happened today, as awful as that sounds. You aren't awful, Ani. Flix took his hand, playing idly with his fingers as he spoke. Maybe you're in shock, maybe you're not. You've already done this dance before. You felt everything socially acceptable about your brother's death once. That's more than enough. His brow furrowed. It's more than he deserves. You were friends, Ani remembered. Are you okay? Flix snorted. We haven't been real friends in a very long time. The only reason I stuck around as long as I did was because of you. That's the only reason I kept his secret for him as well. You really shouldn't have. I see that now, Flix agreed. But hindsight is 20/20. If I could go back, I'd take you from that place the moment I first laid eyes on you. Ani smiled. I wouldn't have gone with you then. Doesn't matter. I'd take you anyway. He hummed. Bath, Ani? All right. It couldn't hurt. He went to get up, but Flick stopped him. It'll take a few minutes for the tub to fill. Take a break. I'll come get you when it's ready. He grabbed onto Flix's wrist when he stood. I'd rather go with you. Even though they were safe and in the house, he didn't like the idea of Flix out of his sight. You could have died earlier, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Hell, he hadn't even known Flix was in danger at Vale until after the fact. That's what you're upset about? Yeah. He pulled Flix closer until he was standing between Ani's spread thighs, and then he dropped his forehead against his stomach. I can lose anything else, anyone else, but I can't lose you. I only just got you. I can't. Flix hushed him and ran his fingers through Ani's hair, his other hand resting on his shoulder to keep him close. I'm not going anywhere, baby. Promise? He captured Ani's chin and tipped his head back so their eyes could meet. I'll never leave you, Aneski. I promise. You? You're stuck with me, he said, wrapping his arms around Flix's waist and clinging for good measure. Forever. That's what I want. What I need. I can do that. I can take care of you for forever. Gladly. It's what I should have been doing from the start. You were, Aneski reminded. I know it was you, paying the bills, buying the groceries whenever Russ forgot, which had been practically every week. Back then, if I noticed, I pretended not to, in part because I wanted to believe in my brother, and also because you thought I was doing it for him, Flix figured. Because you thought we were dating. Forgive me? For putting that gross-ass mental picture in my mind? Flix made a gagging sound. Maybe eventually. What do I have to do? Ani pulled away slightly, just enough he could bring his hand down between them and draw a line down Flix's stomach, past his navel. When he made it to the top of Flix's jeans, the Brumo member caught his hand. You can get up and go take that bath. Seriously? Yes, seriously. But I'm not fucking you until you've got a better grasp on your emotions, Ani. He frowned. I'm not going to hurt myself. Was that it? It was the only reason he could think of that Flix would refuse to sleep with him. Was he worried that there'd be a repeat with the knife now that he'd actually lost his brother? I know that, Flix said, dashing that hypothesis. You should still take some time. He helped Ani stand and then led him toward the hallway. We still have to decide what to do with your friends. They aren't my friends. He followed him to their room, and then into the bathroom, waiting by the sink while Flix went to start the water in the massive clawed tub. Still, as soon as he had the water going, he straightened and turned back to him, a serious expression on his face. We have to figure out what to do with them. What do you want to do? Flix gave a single shake of his head. This isn't about what I want. Why not? You're the one who was shot. We were both shot at, Flix pointed out. Chapter 29. Ani watched him for a minute, the tub filling the only sound before he finally asked, Did you think I went with Bowser willingly? He didn't know why he was so worried about the answer, only knew that if Flix didn't trust him at all, his heart might actually break. Things had moved too quickly earlier for him to bring it up sooner, but his hands had clearly been tied, so that had to work in his favor now in convincing. Relax, Flix told him. I can practically see how anxious you are. Truthfully, I thought about it for a split second, but then I checked the tracker. If you were trying to run, the first thing you would have done was ditch the ring, not your multi-slate. I've bought you a new one, by the way. Yuz should be bringing it by later. Yuz? Odd choice. Why him? Easy. Flix came forward and caged Ani against the sink with an arm at either side of him. So you can answer the door in nothing but a towel. Ani scowled. You won't fuck me, but you'll use me to make a statement? You didn't seem to mind all that much at the club. You're missing the first part of my complaint, he drawled, and Flix laughed and kissed his forehead. If you aren't going to give me your cock, will you give me something else? What do you want? Aneski blew out a breath and glanced away. I want to know what happened that day. What really happened. Flix was quiet for a second before he figured out what he was referring to. The day Russ faked his death. He sighed and started to step away, only for Ani to grab his shirt to keep him there. Russ saw Haroon do something illegal. Bigger than the petty crime the shepherds tended to get into. He wouldn't tell me what, and frankly, I didn't really give a shit. Knowing the details didn't matter to me since Haroon and the shepherds didn't matter. He was scared though, legitimately. The kind of fear you can't fake. I see it all the time. I knew he meant it when he came begging for help, Flix began. And you just agreed? Ani hated how simple he was making it sound. Of course not, he stated. I wanted to find another way to help him, but he insisted running was his only option. I would have walked away, but he brought you into things. How? He mentioned that Haroon knew about you and was always asking questions about your well-being. He'd kept you out of the shepherd so far, but if Haroon found out, he'd go after you first in order to get to Russ. Your brother always knew you were my weak spot. He promised he was only going to be gone long enough to collect the proof against Haroon that he needed, then he'd come back. But he didn't, Ani pointed out. It's been 3 years. Haroon only recently passed, Flix said. I thought for sure after that Russ would keep his word, that perhaps he'd just been a monumental coward too scared to come back for you until it was all clear. Then I found out about the letters he'd sent, how he'd put you in danger well before now. He played me. Okay, but how? Flix ran a hand through his hair. Haroon would only believe it if the Brummel were somehow involved, and since Russ and I were known to be friends, having me be there made the most logical sense. It was believable that we'd get into a fight since we'd been on the outs recently anyway. What? Ani didn't recall that. Why? Flix gave him a pointed stare. Because of me? Every time I came over, I saw you using malfunctioning electronics and wearing worn clothing. Hell, half the time the fridge was empty. Russ was supposedly making some money through the Shepherds, and I'd already purchased the apartment for you both. He'd hit me up for coin at least once every 2 weeks, claiming it was for something you needed, and then got pissed when I started coming around more often to check for myself. During that time period, Flix had come to the house more frequently, but Russ told me it was because the two of you were getting serious. That bastard. Ani cleared his throat. So you agreed to start the fire and make it look like an accident? I used my power, he confirmed. Not that anyone knew that's what it was, including Russ, but yeah. Got some of my Brummel friends to get me a dead body, replaced it with Russ, and waited for him to slip out the window and down the drain pipe unnoticed. Then I started the fire directly over the body and let it burn. That's why the temperature was hot enough to turn it to ash. Lightning. Flix shrugged. Basically. I used as much of my power as I could, so there'd be no chance there'd be anything left that could be used to identify him. Russ snuck out of the city and was meant to contact me once he made it somewhere safe, only I never heard from him again. You didn't try looking for him? I didn't want to risk word leaking and getting back to Haroon, so I didn't. The Shepherds were fairly new, and we didn't yet know if they'd become a threat or not. The Brummel were more cautious around them. I couldn't tell you either because if you let on, you'd be the first person Haroon would try to use to smoke Russ out. Ani snorted. After today, we both know that wouldn't have worked. Not a risk I was willing to take, Flix said. Not then, not now. And why didn't you come to tell me after a few months, or after a year? You joined the Shepherds and things got more complicated. You were closer to Haroon than ever, and there was no good way for me to tell you your brother faked his death. The likelihood of you not believing me was too high. By that point, I'd done too much to push you away. He nodded. It made sense, even if it was frustrating that they'd wasted so much time. The water in the tub shut off automatically, signaling that it was full. But before Flix could try to step away again, Ani tightened his hold on his shirt. I want to be with you always, no matter what anyone else says or does. I want us to make decisions together, and I want us to rely on each other. I don't just want to be your onus and title, Flix. I want it to be the real deal. I want to be yours, and I don't want... Got a lot of demands, huh, Tiny Terror? Flix chucked him under the chin and chuckled when he glared in response. Does this mean you forgive me for the past? Ani thought about it. He'd still harbored strong negative emotions about all of that. Still felt scared of being abandoned again. But it wasn't as intense as it'd been even a couple of days ago, which meant it wouldn't be as bad a week from now, or 2 weeks, or 3. The longer they were together, the better it would get. That's what he wanted. He wanted to build something on top of the bullshit that had been the bricks of their past. Can we start fresh? Ani asked. Flix cocked his head. Do we need to? No, not really. When he'd really thought about it, their foundation hadn't been made from all those crappy moments. They'd started with the kind look in Flix's eye that first time they'd met. All the times he treated Ani to food because he could tell he was starving or needed to get away from Russ for a bit. All those hours he'd spent helping him with his homework. They weren't that far apart in age, and yet Flix had acted more like a big brother to Ani than Russ ever had, and from that, something else had formed. I love you, Ani confessed. I think I always have. And you love me too, don't you? Flix leaned in and kissed him, softly at first, before his tongue became more persistent. It wasn't long before he had Ani sitting on the sink with his legs wrapped around his waist, but almost as quickly as things escalated, it was ending. Yes, I love you, Flix pulled back and said, pressing his lips to the rise of Ani's cheek. Which is why we aren't doing this right now. Bath. He pulled him down and urged him toward the tub. You're still too high-strung at the moment. There will be time for sex later. But, Ani... Flix kissed him again. Just a quick peck, his mouth there and gone in a flash. We'll have all the time in the world to do whatever we want with each other. I promise. He hesitated, wanting to argue further, but knew when he wasn't going to be able to get through to Flix. With a heave of frustration, he started to pull his clothes off, not caring about where they fell as he dropped them and turned to step into the steaming tub. He hated to admit it, but the second he slid into the water, a groan slipped past his lips. Flix chuckled knowingly and perched the edge, watching as Ani lowered himself all the way. What about classes tomorrow? Would you like to skip? He scrunched his brow. After fighting so hard to be allowed back, it didn't feel fair that he'd have to give it up again. Yet, I'd like to, he admitted, but I'm really worried I won't make my deadline. School is important to me, Flix. Flix nodded and reached across for the body wash on the built-in shelf on the wall. I'll have one of the spare rooms converted into an art studio for you tomorrow. Will it bother you if people are coming and going to get that done? If so, I can schedule it another day. Or you and I can go out. I'd rather stay in. Ani cut him off. He was mentally drained. I feel safe here. Ironic, he teased, after begging so prettily to be let out. He splashed some of the water at him. Shut up. All right, so we'll stay in, and I'll have them convert the room furthest from ours. Flix paused. Or maybe that's too far. I'm not going to do anything stupid, Ani grumbled. Seriously, can we please move past that? It was a dumb mistake. At the glare he received, he wisely backtracked. Okay, not a mistake, but it was dumb. I know. You don't have to keep telling me that, Flix said. I trust you. He squirted some body wash directly onto his hand and then started to lather it over Ani's shoulders, trailing his hand down the center of his chest until he met water before smoothing it back up again. I was only thinking about how my office is closer to the bedroom and how, if you're that far away, I'll have to relocate. Really? Ani settled back against the edge of the tub, the warm water and the gentle strokes of Flix's hand causing some of the tension to seep right out of him. He hadn't realized how right Flix had been about his mood. He nodded. Ani stopped Flix's hand when it started across his neck. Say it again. Say what? Don't be cute. Impossible, Flix stated. Pretty sure that's my line. Come on, I want to hear you say it again. Flix planted a palm on the other side of the tub and bent over him until their mouths were close enough to touch. I love you, Ineski. My onus, my everything. He grinned before he could help it, only slightly embarrassed by how absolutely giddy he felt. Pinch me. Faster than he could blink, Flix's hand shot out and he twisted Ani's nipple. Ow! You told me to do it. He stuck his tongue out at Ani and then straightened, squeezing more body wash onto his palm. So what? You're going to do everything I ask from now on? Ani rubbed at his tender flesh, pausing when Flix shrugged. I've always spoiled you. I still don't know what I want to do about Ganon and Bowser, Ani said. That's okay. Won't Baikel get impatient? Let him. Flix returned to washing him leisurely, clearly unconcerned by that possibility. You'd really risk pissing him off for me? You're the most important person in my life, he replied. Of course I would. Oh, that reminds me. He found out about my powers. He what? Ani tried to get up but was pushed back into place. How? I'll tell you all about it, he held his gaze. So long as you're good and sit still. Be good for you? Ani settled himself comfortably. I can do that. He could do that for Flix forever. Epilogue, 1 year later. Not so rough. Ani tried to push against Flix's thigh, but the sound of slapping skin only came louder, their joint sounds echoing in the tiny storage closet they'd slunk off to in the middle of the event. His event. His protests ended with a moan as Flix kicked his legs open further and stroked in with a hard thrust of his hips that had the metal shelving unit Ani was leaning against rattling chaotically. Too deep. It's too deep. Ease up. The second they'd stepped in, Flix had spun him around and shoved him down over the middle shelf. He'd made quick work of Ani's pants and had barely taken the time to open him up before his cock had nudged against his tight entrance, demanding passage. They'd fucked this morning before getting ready for the gallery, which was probably the only reason why the sting was minimal and his body adjusted to the intrusion so quickly. But still. He buried his head between his arms and lifted his hips, trying to get that cock to hit a better angle, one that didn't make him feel like his insides were being rearranged by a battering ram. For his efforts, his prostate took a sudden and intense hit that caused him to careen forward. Flix grabbed onto his hips and pulled him back onto his cock, fucking into him with ferocity, as if something outside had set him off and made him... You're angry, Ani gasped as he came to that realization too late. Why? Not angry, Flix corrected, reaching over to grab him by the front of the throat. He hauled him up so that his back came against Flix's chest, staying seated within him the entire time. Just making a point. To who? Ani's hard dick dripped, and he reached for it, tugging on it in time with Flix's thrusts, until the Brummel member got wise to what he was doing. Do I have to tie you up? Flix shoved his hand away and then spun Ani around, lifting him with his hands beneath his ass. He lowered him down, his cock slipping back into place with ease. Our clothes, Ani said. Don't get them dirty. I still have my speech. This gallery showing was his first official one as a freelance artist. Not only were all of their friends currently out there roaming the open space, but so was a good portion of the general public. They'd all come to see Ani's work, not listen to him get pounded by his boyfriend in a storage closet. The only ones guaranteed not in attendance were Gannon and Bowser. In the end, Aneski hadn't been able to order any real harm to either of them. He'd kicked Gannon out of the Shepherds and cut him off completely. For a while, Flix had him monitored by a Brummel member to ensure Gannon never even got close to Ani. By the time graduation had rolled around, his ex-friend seemed to have finally taken the hint. He'd gotten a job in another city right after, and Ani hadn't heard from him since. Bowser had survived his surgery, but the person who came out of it was different from the one Ani had always known. He'd been morose, guilty over having killed Russ, and heartbroken. The police had wanted to book him for the murder, but Ani had gotten Flix to give him a light sentence. Banishment from the capital. He felt bad for Bowser, knew he'd been used by Russ, but that didn't mean Ani could forgive him for putting everyone in danger that day. Flix kept tabs on him to ensure he didn't try to return for any reason, but Aneski wasn't too concerned. Wherever Bowser was, he was positive he was haunted by what he'd done. That was more than enough punishment. Scream for me, tiny terror, Flix ordered, forcing his head to the side to present his neck. He chomped down and sucked as hard as he could, causing Ani's hips to jerk and his cock to slam in even deeper than before. Ani hit his back and tried to pry him off. Stop it, no marks. Are you sure? Yes, of course I'm sure, you psycho. This is a prestigious event, one I've been waiting for. You missed it, Flix interrupted, but Samara was talking to me by the punch bowl just now. Aneski froze. She what? Since Flix picked Ani up from school for the rest of their final semester, Samara had gotten used to seeing him around and, in Ani's opinion, had grown far too comfortable with him. At graduation, she'd even ask Ani to take a photo of her and Flix, as though the Brummel member was the one in their graduating class wearing the cap and gown instead of him. Even Rexton, who'd finally started warming up to the idea of him and Flix together after seeing how good Flix treated him, had noticed her crush. Cage liked to laugh about it, often, whenever he wanted to get on Ani's nerves. It'd been more than half a year since the last time they'd seen her. Ani thought he'd heard she was working 3 cities over. Why the hell had she come back now? For what? His gallery showing? Or his man? Where's the punch bowl? He hadn't noticed it, too busy making sure all of his pieces were set up where he wanted them. The gallery owners were responsible for the catering, so he'd gratefully left it to them. On the table, Flix grinned and motioned over his shoulder with his chin. Right next to this door. Ani hooked his ankles against the narrow of Flix's lower back and dug his heels into him. Harder. Fuck me harder. And he rapidly undid the top 3 buttons of his dress shirt, yanking off his tie for good measure before tipping his head to offer the other side of his throat. Mark me. But you said, do it. He was in no mood for Flix's games now. Just the idea of Samara sidling up next to Flix, batting those fake-ass eyelashes at him. Fuck me so hard I have to stumble my way up to the podium later. Flix laughed and started pumping his hips with renewed vigor. Whatever you say, baby. He hissed when Ani squeezed around his cock. Good light, I love it when you're jealous. That wasn't a bad suggestion. Yours looks cute tonight, Ani said, and when the Brummel member froze, he had a moment to wonder if maybe he'd taken it too far before he found himself tossed onto the dirty ground. He gasped as Flix dropped over him, pinning him to the cement floor as he went wild. Flix shoved his legs to the side and then captured Ani's wrists over his head. He drove his cock in and out in a frenzy, sweat dripping from his brow as he worked them both to the point of exhaustion, even as their mutual pleasure grew. Ani howled, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes as his hole was beaten, his dick crushed between them, so he was forced to only take whatever pressure and friction the movement of Flix's lower body provided. Please, 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 Batessi. Who looks cute tonight? Flix growled, thrusting in so hard that Ani momentarily saw stars. You do, he screamed. You look cute. And who am I? Mine. Flix hummed in approval. And who are you? Yours, Ani whimpered. Scream my name, Tiny Terror. Loud enough for everyone out there to hear. He'd be pissed about this later, about his ruined suit, his inability to walk without wincing, and the knowing looks everyone would surely give him. But not right now. Right now, there was only one thing Ani cared about. Only one thing that mattered. The most important thing. Flix! He called him over and over again, voice turning into sobs as he was brought closer and closer to release. He called him as if his life depended on him, like Flix Fulmini was his life itself. Probably because Flix was, and always would be. Finally, and forever. This has been Devil May Fall, a dark sci-fi mafia enemies to lovers romance, The Devils of Vitality. Written by Chani Lynn Feener, narrated by L.B. Tran. Copyright 2024-2025 by Chani Lynn Feener. Production copyright by Chani Lynn Feener.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.